I'd like to call the hearing to order, and since we have a quorum, I would ask the committee to consider 2 civilian nominations and a list of 27 pending military nominations. First, I ask the committee to consider the following civilian nominations: Mr. Ronald Cohane to be Assistant Secretary of Defense for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, and the Honorable Nicholas H. Girton to be the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. Is there a motion to favorably report these 2 nominations?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Finally, I ask the committee to consider a list of 27 pending military nominations. All of these nominations have been before the committee the required length of time. Is there a motion to favorably report this list of 27 pending military nominations?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Thank you very much. Welcome, Secretary Austin, General Milley, and Secretary McCord. Before I get into my statement, I want to take a moment to recognize the tragic disasters that struck Mississippi and Alabama this weekend. Our hearts are certainly with the people of Mississippi and Alabama after tornadoes caused terrible loss of life and intense damage. And I know Senator Wicker, Senator Tubeville are doing everything they can to help their states, and we're thinking about the families and loved ones who were suffering.
Thank you very much.
Quite all right. Good morning. The committee meets today to receive testimony on the President's budget request for the Department of Defense for fiscal year 2024. Witnesses this morning are Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller Michael McCord, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley. Thank you for appearing before us today, and please extend the committee's thanks to the service members and defense civilians in the department. I'd like to take a moment to recognize that this will be General Milley's final posture hearing before his retirement later this year. General, you have served this nation for 43 years with honor, skill, and steadfast leadership, and we are deeply grateful. We thank your family for their support throughout your service, and we congratulate you on a very well-deserved retirement. Thank you, sir. Earlier this month, President Biden released his fiscal year 2024 budget request for the Department of Defense with a top line of $842 billion. As the President's budget recognizes and as his national defense strategy makes clear, China is our primary competitor. The PRC is the only nation with both the intent and the capability to challenge the security and economic interests of the United States and our allies and partners. At the same time, Russia remains a violent, destabilizing force. Putin's assault on Ukraine is inflicting horrific suffering on innocent civilians, threatening European stability, and harming the global economy. However, if Putin thought his war would drive a wedge between NATO members and the international community, he was badly mistaken. The international community has united in a way not seen in decades, and our potential adversaries around the world are taking note. The Biden administration and the witnesses before us today deserve great credit for leading this effort. In addition to the threats posed by Russia and China, nations like Iran and North Korea continue to push the boundaries of military brinksmanship, and issues like terrorism and climate change remain persistent. Prevailing in this environment will require thoughtful strategies and a budget that is structured to meet the challenges we face. During today's hearing, I would ask our witnesses to update us on the strategic planning documents published over the past year, including the National Defense Strategy, National Military Strategy, Nuclear Posture Review, and Missile Defense Review, and how the 2024 budget will execute these strategies. An essential element for the United States' long-term strategic competition will be our ability to build the joint capabilities of our armed forces across all domains, including space, cyber, and information operations. As the Defense Department's recently released joint concept for competing makes clear, the object of our nation's adversaries is to win without fighting. The concept warns that if we do not adapt to the realities of long-term competition, quote, the United States risks ceding strategic influence, advantage, and leverage while preparing for war that never comes. I'm interested to hear from our witnesses how this budget supports joint capabilities to ensure our military remains the world's premier fighting force. To that end, I am encouraged that the budget includes the largest ever request for research, development, testing, and evaluation, a total of $145 billion. The budget would provide significant funding for modernization areas such as microelectronics, artificial intelligence, hypersonics, and 5G, technologies that will be critical for our national defense. Our strategy towards China and Russia should not be solely defined in dollars by how much, but rather where and why we are investing to achieve the greatest comparative advantage. Keeping our competition with China front and center, this budget request includes $9.1 billion for priorities covered by the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, or PDI. I am encouraged by the progress we have made through PDI thus far, and this committee will continue working to help improve the design and posture of the joint force in the Indo-Pacific region. This should include strengthening logistics, modernizing infrastructure, conducting exercises, and training and building the capabilities of our allies and partners. Indeed, our approach to the Indo-Pacific should be informed in part by lessons drawn from the European Defense and Deterrence Initiative, or EDI, which has played a decisive role in strengthening Ukraine for the last 9 years. The Department's 2024 budget request wisely includes $3.4 billion for EDI-related investments and $300 million for the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. I'm also pleased to see that this budget request prioritizes taking care of our men and women in uniform and the civilians who serve alongside them by providing an across-the-board pay raise of 5.2%. This pay increase sends an important message to the workforce at a time when recruiting is particularly challenging. The budget request also includes $16.7 billion for military construction projects, and I'm particularly pleased to see increases in barracks sustainment. The improvements to our facilities, repair, and modernization will go a long way toward the joint forces' readiness and quality of life of our military personnel. With regard to our nuclear strategy, I understand that the budget request supports important steps for the modernization of our nuclear triad. Given the reckless behavior of Putin over the past year, our allies and partners depend on our extended deterrence now more than ever. We must also be acutely aware of China's rapidly growing arsenal. Modernization of our strategic forces is needed to reassure not only our allies, but deter any attack on our homeland by any of our nuclear-armed competitors. Even as we modernize, we should seek ways to promote strategic stability, reduce the risk of miscalculation, and if possible, reduce nuclear stockpiles when verifiable for all parties. Given these strategic threats, the proposed investments in tried and true platforms like the Columbia and the Virginia-class submarines is a prudent decision. Similarly, this budget supports the further development of long-range stealth bombers, strengthening the fighter fleet, and building up the defense industrial base, including upgrades to the Navy's public and private shipyards. At the same time, taxpayers should not have to pay for programs or systems that are wasteful or ineffective, and Congress must not shirk its responsibility to divest outdated platforms in favor of more effective new technologies. We are engaged in a struggle between autocracy and democracy, and we cannot fail in succeeding in that struggle. Again, I'd like to thank the witnesses for their participation today. I look forward to testimony, and let me now recognize Ranking Member Senator Wicker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I too want to thank our distinguished witnesses for being here. For the third year in a row, President Biden has sent to Congress a budget request that cuts military spending amid a more dangerous and complex threat environment. We are in the most crucial years of our efforts to prevent aggression by our peer adversary, the Chinese Communist Party. The cost of failure in this effort would be nearly unthinkable. Despite international efforts to the contrary, Russia was not deterred from invading Ukraine, and that invasion has already cost the global economy well over $1 trillion, in addition to untold suffering and loss of life. These costs will continue to mount unless we give the Ukrainians every single tool they need to win as soon as possible. Our intelligence community tells us a deterrence failure over Taiwan would make the economic effect of Ukraine conflict look vanishingly small. This year's budget is the last one that funds capabilities that are likely to be fielded before 2027. That's the year by which Xi Jinping says he wants the People's Liberation Army to be ready to take Taiwan. that makes our work here very urgent. I'm heartened to see that the budget request prioritizes some programs of critical importance to near-term deterrence and warfighting, including the Strategic Capabilities Office, DARPA-led Assault Breaker 2, electronic warfare and cyber programs, and the emerging efforts to deliver real warfighting capability out of the JADC2 program. These near-term, high-return investments are crucial. Even so, I remain concerned that we are not moving fast enough on some of these efforts. At the same time, while the National Defense Strategy emphasizes the importance of our posture in the Western Pacific, I note this budget actually cuts the level of spending on key planning and design activities. This is despite the clear congressional signal sent by Senators Reid and Inhofe in the statute when they created the Pacific Deterrence Initiative several years ago. We cannot successfully deter Xi with a brittle basing and logistics infrastructure. Further, we must work together to think bigger and more creatively about the scale of investment and focus needed to compete with Beijing in the decades to come. Our current nuclear modernization efforts are moving too slowly and will produce a force ill-equipped to deter multiple nuclear-armed adversaries. The current approach to rebuilding our shipbuilding industrial base is also woefully insufficient. The Department of Defense has failed our shipbuilders by promising stability and then pulling the rug out from under them. This has hit amphibious shipbuilders particularly hard. This budget also fails by actually shrinking the U.S. Navy this year and in future years, instead of growing the fleet as is required by law. Congress, again, will need to rectify these failures. Yet even where Congress and the Department of Defense have agreed on our approach, such as with the submarine industrial base, progress has been too slow or non-existent. We need to make generational investments across our basic defense infrastructure, including shipyards, munitions, and ammunition plants, advanced test ranges, and even barracks for our service members, and I do appreciate the chair emphasizing that in his statement. Similarly, we cannot effectively compete with and deter our adversaries with the recruiting deficiencies we've heard about, for example, at last week's hearing. I hope our witnesses will address this issue and state whether this budget contains every single possible investment that could alleviate the recruiting crisis. Lastly, I want to discuss the department's relationship with Congress. I think we have some work to do on this front. And let me mention two instances. First, on February 8, I sent the Secretary of Defense a letter asking some simple questions about the facts and decision-making surrounding the Chinese spy balloon. This was signed by Senator Rubio, the co-chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. 3 weeks later, a deputy wrote back with a non-answer, which I can only describe as dismissive. So I sent another letter reiterating my request. Yesterday afternoon, the day before this hearing, I finally received a response to my letter from the Secretary. I have significant questions about that response, and I will address that in questions for the record. So that's one thing. Also, early last Thursday morning, an Iranian-backed attack killed one American contractor and injured several U.S. service members in Syria. These troops are there to ensure that ISIS does not pose a threat to the United States. That very day, the Senate was considering several significant votes relating to the use of force against Iran. And yet no member of the Senate, to my knowledge, was told that day about an attack by this very adversary while we were voting on issues involving them. Given the number of legislative affairs personnel that the Office of the Secretary has, I find it hard to believe that no one in the executive branch was tracking the votes on the Senate floor or thought of the nexus between our decisions and the very acts that were going on the other side of the globe. It is unacceptable that no one informed the Senate of this attack in a timely manner. Mr. Secretary and Mr. Chairman, we're all in this together. We're all on the same side here. I would strongly prefer that the Biden administration treat the Congress as a partner moving forward. And I thank the witnesses for appearing today. Again, I thank them for their service, and I look forward to their testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Wicker. And let me recognize Secretary Austin. Mr. Secretary, please.
Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Wicker, and distinguished members of the committee, at the outset, let me echo your comments, Chairman, regarding the tragedies that we've just witnessed in Mississippi and in Alabama, and our condolences go out to all. I'm glad to be here with you today to testify in support of the President's budget request for fiscal year 2024. I'm joined, as always, by General Milley, and I remain grateful for his leadership. I'm also glad to be joined by the Department's Comptroller and CFO, Mike McCord. This is a strategy-driven budget and one driven by the seriousness of our strategic competition with the People's Republic of China. At $842 billion, it is a 3.2% increase over fiscal year 23 enacted, and it is 13.4% higher than fiscal year 22 enacted. And this budget will help us continue to implement our national defense strategy and the President's national security strategy. Now, I have three key priorities: to defend our nation, to take care of our outstanding people, and to succeed through teamwork. The PRC is our pacing challenge, and we're driving hard to meet it. Our budget builds on our previous investments to deter aggression. We're investing in a more resilient force posture in the Indo-Pacific and increasing the scale and the scope of our exercises with our partners. And this budget includes a 40% increase over last year's budget for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. And it's an all-time high of $9.1 billion. And that will fund a stronger force posture, better defenses for Hawaii and Guam, and deeper cooperation with our allies and partners. Now, this budget also makes the Department's largest ever investments in both R&D and procurement. We're requesting more than $61 billion to sustain air dominance. That includes funding for our fighters and the extraordinary B-21 strategic bomber that I helped unveil last December. We're also seeking more than $48 billion for sea power, including new construction of 9 Battle Force ships. And we're boosting capacity in America's shipyards to build the ships that our strategy demands. We're investing a total of $1.2 billion in the submarine industrial base. And we're buying 2 Virginia-class attack submarines and 1 Columbia-class missile submarine. On land, we're investing in air and missile defense and in defenses to counter unmanned aerial vehicles. We're also requesting $11 billion to deliver the right mix of long-range fires, including major investments in hypersonics. We'll also continue to modernize all 3 legs of our nuclear triad and bolster our strategic deterrence. And we put forward the largest space budget in Pentagon history. We've requested $33.3 billion to improve our capabilities and our resilience in space. Now, let me again thank Congress for providing the Department with multi-year procurement authorities and appropriations for critical munitions. In this budget, we're requesting more multi-year procurement authorities, and we're asking for more than $30 billion to further invest in the industrial base and to buy the maximum number of munitions that American industry can produce. This budget also moves us away from aging capabilities that aren't relevant to future conflicts, so we can focus on the advances that our warfighters will need. Now, our national defense strategy calls out Putin's highly aggressive Russia as an acute threat. And under President Biden's leadership, the United States has rallied the world to help Ukraine fight Russia's indefensible invasion. We've reinforced NATO's defense and deterrence on its eastern flank. Our allies and partners have provided crucial security assistance coordinated through the Ukraine Defense Contact Group that I lead. And we will support Ukraine's defense for as long as it takes. Meanwhile, the department remains vigilant against other persistent threats, including North Korea and Iran. And we will take all necessary measures to defend our troops and our interests overseas, as seen in our recent airstrikes against facilities linked to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And we're also investing in over-the-horizon counterterrorism capabilities. And Mr. Chairman, our joint force stands ready to meet any challenge. You could see the force's readiness after Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, when we swiftly deployed elements of the 3rd Infantry Division to Poland to shore up NATO's eastern flank. And we closely monitor readiness at the unit level and maintain response forces at our highest states of readiness, while the rest of the force, by design, is preparing for future contingencies. So this budget will help us maintain our readiness with $146 billion in funding for operations, training, and maintenance. This budget also invests in improving our readiness and resilience in the face of climate change and other 21st century threats. Mr. Chairman, we're going to remain the strongest military in the world. And as we mark the 50th anniversary of our all-volunteer force, I am enormously proud of the brave men and women who choose to wear the cloth of our nation. We owe it to them and to their families to take the best possible care of all of our people. And over the past 2 years, we've made moves easier, we've cut commissary prices, and we've made child care more affordable. And this budget funds other key steps to increase the quality of life of our teammates, including the largest military and civilian pay raises in decades. Now, we're also pushing hard to help eliminate suicide in our ranks, including immediate steps to hire more mental health professionals and improve access to mental health care. And meanwhile, we're working toward a military that's free of sexual assault. We worked with Congress to improve the response of sexual assault and related crimes under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and those reforms will be fully implemented by the end of this year. And the department is also investing in the specialized workforce to combat sexual assault, harassment, suicide, and more. Now, the department's 3rd priority is succeeding through teamwork. And our rival network of allies and partners magnifies our power and expands our security. And in recent months, our friends in the Indo-Pacific have taken major steps forward. The Philippines has agreed to nearly double the number of sites where we cooperate together. Japan is committed to double its defense spending. And through the historic AUKUS partnership, we'll work with our Australian and British allies to build game-changing defense advantages that will deter aggression and boost our defense industrial capacity. In sum, Mr. Chairman, this is the budget that will meet this moment, and I respectfully ask for your support. And the single most effective way that this committee can support the department and our outstanding troops is with an on-time, full-year appropriation. So I look forward to working with all of you so that we can continue to defend our democracy and support the forces of freedom in this hour of challenge. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General Milley. Do you have a statement?
I do, Chairman. And Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Wicker, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. And I want to echo the condolences of both the Secretary and the Chairman for the great people of Mississippi and Alabama. Tragic losses. Our hearts go out to them, and many, many soldiers and sailors, airmen, Marines in uniform come from your 2 great states. So our hearts go out to you. I've been privileged to defend this country for 43 consecutive years in uniform. And as the Chairman said, this is likely my last set of posture hearings. But I do want to thank the Congress for your continued support to our military not only on this budget, but for the last 4 decades. And I ask that you support this year's request with an on-time budget approval. I'm honored to represent here today the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, guardians, and families of the United States Joint Force, along with Secretary Austin and Mike McCord. I want to publicly thank them both for their leadership. Our joint force, as the Secretary said, is the most lethal and capable military in the world because of your support. Our purpose, the military's purpose, the uniformed military, is simple. It's to defend the United States, and our task is to fight and win in all the domains of combat to secure America and prevent great power war. Readiness for us in uniform, and readiness now and readiness in the future through modernization is our #1 priority, and there is no other #1 other than the readiness for combat. The Joint Force will accomplish this at the fiscal year 24 budget request of $842 billion. Right now, as pointed out by Senator Wicker, the international system is under stress. For the first time, the United States is facing 2 major nuclear powers whose vital national security interests are in competition with the United States. Both the People's Republic of China and Russia have the means to threaten our interests and our way of life. But war with either one is neither inevitable nor imminent. Great power war has not happened in the last 80 years, in large part because of the rules put in place at the end of World War II and the capabilities of the United States military along with our allies and partners. We must remain the most powerful nation, and the great power peace then will be prevailing. The People's Republic of China remains our #1 long-term geostrategic security challenge. The PRC intends to be the regional hegemon in Asia within the next 10 years and to exceed the United States' overall military capability by mid-century, and they have publicly stated 2049. The PRC's actions are moving it down the path towards potential confrontation with its neighbors and the United States. But again, war with China is neither inevitable nor imminent. Additionally, Russia is an acute threat and remains quite dangerous. Over a year ago, Russia undertook an illegal and unprovoked war against Ukraine, threatening the peace on the European continent and global stability. We are supporting Ukraine to protect its sovereignty and supporting NATO with the United States force presence in every single nation on NATO's eastern flank. This fight is not just in Ukraine's interest. It is in the United States' interest to protect the system that has prevented great power war. In Iran threatens to push the Middle East into regional instability by supporting terrorists and proxy forces, as we recently saw. Just last week, Iranian-aligned groups killed 1 American and injured 7 in attacks on coalition bases in Syria. We acted immediately to defend our troops, and we will continue to counter terrorist threats in the region and anywhere else we find them. And Iran has taken actions also to improve its capabilities to produce a nuclear weapon. From the time of an Iranian decision, Iran could produce enough fissile material for a nuclear weapon in less than 2 weeks, and it would only take several months thereafter to produce an actual nuclear weapon. The United States remains committed, as a matter of policy, that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. The United States military has developed multiple options for our national leadership to consider if or when Iran decides to develop a nuclear weapon. North Korea's continued ballistic missile testing and nuclear weapons development pose threats to our homeland and our allies and partners. But we stand together shoulder to shoulder with the Republic of Korea to deter North Korean aggression as we have for 7 decades. Terrorists continue to operate around the globe, threatening fear, destruction, destabilization, and this budget supports our continued counterterrorism effort. In short, the United States military stands ready to protect our nation's interests and the American people. We are currently standing watch on Freedom's frontier with nearly 250,000, 250,000 troops in Europe, Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and South America. The United States never fights alone. A key source of our strength is our large global network of alliances and partnerships. Just this month, we conducted 63 operations and joint and combined exercises globally with our allies and partners. And lastly, our operational readiness rates are higher now than they've been in many years. Currently, 60% of our active force is at the highest state of readiness and could deploy to combat in less than 30 days. well exceeding our minimum standard of 1/3 of the force. 10%, in fact, could deploy in less than 96 hours. This military, the United States military, is ready. The joint force is at an inflection point, and we must balance operations readiness and modernization. We must not allow ourselves to create the false trap that we can either modernize our forces for the future or focus only on today. We must do both. We must integrate advancing technologies, including precision long-range fires, hypersonic weapons, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, robotics, and all-domain sensors. The time is now. We have very little margin to wait. And the common thread critical to accomplish all of this is our people. We must continue investing in training, education, and talent management to be prepared for the future operating environment. I urge Congress to support this budget's significant pay raise, health care, housing, and child care initiatives. This budget sustains our readiness and adapts the joint force to the future warfighting requirements. There is nothing more expensive than fighting a war. Preparing for war is very expensive, but nothing more expensive than fighting it. And preparing for war will deter war, and that is our goal. We must act with clear-eyed urgency in order to deter great power war. By doing so, no adversary should ever underestimate the resolve of our nation and the strength of our military. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, General Milley. Secretary McCord, do you have a statement?
No, Mr. Chairman, other than to wish your staff director a speedy recovery.
Thank you very much. Secretary Austin and General Milley, logistics is not the most exciting topic, but in many cases it's one of the most crucial topics, particularly in the Pacific, where distance is as much an enemy as our opposing forces. First, Mr. Secretary, and then General Milley, can you comment upon the investments we're making in our modernizing our logistics, particularly in the Indo-PACOM area, command and control activities that would help deliver these resources to our troops?
Thanks, Chairman. As I stated earlier, in this budget, we're asking to invest some $9.1 billion in the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. That will enable us to strengthen forward infrastructure so we can continue to forward deploy troops, so that will enable us to deter further forward in theater. In addition to that, we've pushed a number of our sustainment elements, like fuel, further into the theater, and we continue to make sure that we have a diverse and agile footprint so that we can rapidly respond to any challenge. But I think that we're investing in the right things and going after the right capabilities to make sure that we can operate further forward.
Thank you. General Milley, please.
Yes, Senator, thank you. Key here is one of the keys here is ammunition, and the Secretary has directed that we analyze all of our ammunition stockages in light of what's going on in Ukraine. That's a key area that we need to increase our capabilities here in the coming years, is ammunition. The second piece there is lift. In the area of lift, both sea lift and airlift, there's a lot of investments in this budget and previous budgets. That'll be an area that requires continued sustained levels of effort is in order to move the force. Projecting power is a key attribute of the U.S. military, and we do that through sea lift and airlift. So that's a second key point. And the last one I would say is the posture. The Secretary has initiated a series with the Indo-PACOM commander, a series of posture adjustments in the Pacific, which should better position us for sustainment, logistical sustainment, if any conflict ever happens.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, we are in a moment where we're having a challenge getting general officers off the floor of the Senate and to their assigned stations after they've been recommended by the Department of Defense and cleared in terms of their performance and their capabilities. Can you tell us what the cumulative effects of this would be in terms of denying promotions to people who are going to take key jobs?
Thanks, Chairman. The effects are absolutely critical in terms of the impact on the force. This is one of the busiest times, or one of the most complex times that we've seen lately. We see a war, the largest conflict in Europe since World War II. We see an aggressive China operating in the Indo-Pacific. We see Iranian-backed elements going after our troops. And there are a number of things happening globally that indicate that we could be in a contest on any one given day. Not approving the recommendation for promotions actually creates a ripple effect through the force that makes us far less ready than we need to be. If you look at what we have coming up, I mean, there are five three-star promotions that are near term, and one of those is the commander of our fleet out in the Gulf, and that's a critical position. Then that starts to multiply. 70 more positions, 3- and 4-star positions over time. They include the chiefs of the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy, and also the chairman's replacement at some point in time, although nobody wants to see that happen. So the effects are cumulative, and it will affect families. It will affect kids going to schools because they won't be able to change their duty station, and so it's a powerful effect and will impact on our readiness.
As I look forward, I have never in my almost 3 decades here seen so many key military positions coming up for replacement. We have the Commandant of the Marine Corps, the Chief of Staff of the Army, the CNO of the Navy, and as you mentioned, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, by law, has to leave in September. And if we cannot resolve this situation, we will be, in many respects, leaderless and at a time of great conflict. So I would hope we would expedite and move quickly on this front. Thank you. With that, let me recognize Senator Wicker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just start with a couple of short answers. I hope these will be. Secretary Austin, first, would you agree that this is the most complex and dangerous threat environment since World War II?
Yes, Senator, I would say that it's one of the most complex periods that we've seen.
General Milley.
Yes, Senator, for sure.
Okay. Over the past 2 years, Congress has added nearly $30 billion to the President's request in FY22 and $45 billion to the President's request in FY23, $75 billion added over the request of the President. Have these additional resources increased our national security and decreased military risk, Mr. Secretary?
They have, Senator. It always helps when you get additional resources, but if you get additional resources with additional requirements, it doesn't help as much. And also, if we can stop doing some of the things that create a drag on our force in terms of causing us to spend money on things that are not relevant in a future fight, that also helps as well. So we appreciate Congress's support in the past for allowing us to get rid of things that are no longer relevant.
And you're welcome on that. General Milley, same question. Has this $75 billion added to our national defense expenditures, have those funds increased our national security?
Yes, I believe they have.
And decreased military risk?
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Secretary Austin, the Biden administration has authority to send $1 billion worth of U.S. weaponry to Taiwan. That is similar to the policy and the authority we authorize with regard to Ukraine. Will the Biden administration exercise this $1 billion in drawdown authority that Congress provided last year?
We will, Senator, and my team is working diligently to make sure that we have the right capabilities in that particular drawdown. Of course, we have the authority. We'll need the appropriations as well. So.
Okay, you'll need an appropriation to replenish that. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator.
And the administration will be requesting a replenishment funding for the transferred defense articles. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Let me then talk about your assessment with regard to Ukraine. I believe you told me, Secretary Austin, that you believe Ukraine now has the upper hand in the war against Russia. Is that correct?
That's correct. This is a highly contested fight, Senator, as you know, and we've seen the tide move back and forth. Most recently, we've seen some pretty significant fighting in the Bakhmut area.
Right, but just with regard to your optimism about Ukraine having the upper hand, that is what you told me yesterday.
It is. Now, what I was about to say, Senator, is that Ukrainians have inflicted significant casualties on the Russians, and they have depleted their inventory of armored vehicles in a way that no one would have ever imagined. And so now we see Russia reaching for T-54s and T-55 tanks because of the level of damage that the Ukrainians have inflicted on them. And we have, in the meantime, been—
And reaching for those tanks demonstrates what to you, sir?
It demonstrates that their capability is waning. And we've continued to witness them be challenged with artillery munitions and other things, and they're reaching out to Iran, they're reaching out to North Korea. I think, we'll see an increase in the fighting in the spring as conditions for maneuver improve. And based upon the things that we've done and continue to do, I think Ukraine will have a real good chance.
Do you believe? Yeah, we're pushed for time, sir. Do you believe there's a real chance for significant Ukrainian advancements between now and the beginning of winter?
I believe there's a chance, and we're doing everything that we can do to ensure that they have their best opportunity to be successful, Senator.
Thank you. And if the chair will indulge me, Mr. Secretary, you've got a pretty big congressional relations office in your shop, do you not?
I do.
Do you agree that it should have occurred to someone in that office to inform senators who were debating about Iran last Thursday about what had occurred with regard to attacks in Syria?
Senator, I think you know that we take the War Powers Act very, very seriously, and after every operation, we're required to brief Congress, and we lean forward and try to ensure that Congress is briefed before we conduct an operation. And we also, in this case, we had an attack and and we launched an attack on the adversaries in the same time period, same short period of time. And so, because of that compressed time, we did both notifications at the same time. We should have notified you earlier, and we will endeavor to do so.
Well, as a matter of fact, Mr. Chairman, if I might, the attack occurred and counterattack occurred in the wee hours of the morning, and members of the Senate were not notified until very late in the afternoon or early evening. That is the fact, is it not?
No, sir. The attack occurred in the morning, and the counterattack occurred evening our time, Eastern time.
Okay, and so after the attack occurred, it did not dawn on anybody in congressional affairs to notify members who were debating this very issue on the Senate floor. I think that is correct.
Senator, our goal is to make sure that we keep you informed, and we will do everything within our power to make sure that we improve our performance.
Thank you very much, Senator Wicker. Senator Shaheen, please.
Thank you. Secretary Austin, General Milley, thank you both for being here this morning and for your service. And General Milley, thank you especially for all of the years that you have given to this country and to all of us. And we will miss you, even if you may not miss these posture hearings. Secretary Austin, I understand that the department may be in the final stages of the review of information operations that was required by the 2020 NDAA. Can you give us any insights into what that may show and how important you think information operations are as we look at the modern defense, and whether there's money in the budget requested to address expanded information operations?
Thanks, Senator. I think what we'll find is that that work will show that information operations is increasingly relevant and increasingly valuable in terms of enabling our operations, and also understanding and countering what our adversaries are doing. And so we will continue to work to refine our policies and procedures and develop talent in this area as well. But this is a key area, and we see it every day as we watch the Ukraine Russia fight and the relevance of those operations in that fight.
Well, one of the areas where information operations have been important is in the Black Sea region, and certainly we saw with the downing of the drone just how important that region is to our national security. Can you talk about what the most pressing threats are that Russia poses in the Black Sea, and what we're thinking about going forward as a strategy to respond to that?
Well, certainly, Senator, Russia would aim to completely control the Black Sea and deny our allies and partners the ability to have continuous access to the sea. You know, I was in the region before this fight started and had engaged with our allies and partners and talked to them about the importance of the access to the Black Sea, encouraged them to work together, and also wanted to make sure that we were doing everything within our power to help them strengthen their capability and strengthen their interoperability. So this is critical, and this is something that I think we need to continue to put energy into.
Well, thank you. I was in the region in February, and I can tell you in the countries that I visited, Georgia, Romania, that there was a great deal of interest in the fact that we might have a more comprehensive approach to the region that deals not just with national security, but also with economic and democratic initiatives there. Over the past several years alone, Congress has appropriated over $1 billion in funding for PFAS-related activities, testing, remediation. The most recent information I've seen suggests that there are more than 700 contaminated military sites across the country, including the former Pease Air Base. Congress has shown a willingness to accelerate testing and cleanup by increasing funding, and yet the department claims that it's unable to execute those increased funding levels. We appropriated $517 million, or authorized it, in fiscal year 2020. Can you speak to what needs to happen in order for the department to make better use of the funds that Congress appropriates to address PFAS?
We will continue to make every effort to make best use of those funds. I think you see in this budget we've asked for another $400 million. And to your point, Senator, if funds are not executed in one particular year, I think they roll over to the next year. So we have the benefit of using the funds that were not completely executed last year, plus the $400 million we're asking for this year. And we'll make every effort to make sure that we're doing everything within our that's possible to utilize the funds, and where we need more, we'll come back and ask you for more.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I hope you will also take a look at our willingness to be transparent with the public where sites have been contaminated, because there is a great deal of distrust, I think, about information sharing from the Department of Defense, and at least we've seen that in the site in New Hampshire, and I think that undermines our ability to address what needs to be done in those sites to clean up the contamination and to encourage the communities to do what they need to do to address the problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sheen. Senator Fisher, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For years, we have underinvested in our munitions production, and we are starting to reverse that trend, but more needs to be done to increase production. Secretary Austin, what is the department currently doing to increase munitions production capacity, and what more does it seek to do in FY24?
Well, thank you, Senator. Let me thank Congress for what you've done to authorize multi-year procurement capability. That sends a strong signal to the industrial base. Also, the numbers that you see reflected in our budget request for procurement sends a strong signal as well. In this particular budget, we're asking for $30 billion to invest in munitions, and that helps us go after the right kinds of munitions that we think we need to replenish stocks and to make sure that we get ahead as well. And also, it allows us to invest a bit in the industrial base. Now, we're engaging our partners in industry and trying to do everything we can to work with them to expand their capacity and their capability. But to your point, there's a lot more work that needs to be done.
The committee has worked to modify or remove older unnecessary contracting requirements so we can get contracting officers to move faster on replacing munitions in Ukraine. Would it be useful to be able to remove or modify these unnecessary requirements for weapons related to really our most pressing challenges in the Western Pacific and in Taiwan as well?
Absolutely, Senator, it would.
Thank you. General Milley, the current U.S. Nuclear modernization plan was originally designed in 2010 when nuclear threats were much less severe than they are today. However, since then, every DoD modernization program, along with every Department of Energy infrastructure project and warhead program, has been delayed or it's been reduced in its scope. Can you tell me how we're going to meet the rapidly growing threats from China and Russia with a force that's smaller and with a force that delivers later than we planned for more than a decade ago? Basically, I'm asking you, how are we going to recognize challenges we have today and meet them?
Thanks, Senator. As you know, the nuclear capability of China is growing, and we can cover that in some detail in a classified session if you so desire. The recapitalization of the nuclear triad is the Secretary and President's #1 defense priority. That is what has been one of the most significant contributors to great power peace in the last 8 decades. So it's imperative for us, the United States, to recapitalize that entire system with the silos, the bombers, as well as the subs, but also the NC-3 system. That's really critical, and it does bother me that some of these programs are behind and they're coming in at over cost, over budget. But we're going to get there, and it'll be a safe, secure, reliable system, guaranteed bet, and we'll maintain the strategic deterrence that we've kept for 80 years.
Last year, you, along with nearly every other senior U.S. military officer, testified that we need to provide presidents with more nuclear options than we have today. Do you still agree with that sentiment?
I do. I believe that.
Okay. Thank you. Yes is fine.
Sure.
As a member of this committee and also as a member of the Senate Commerce Committee, I've worked for years to promote efficient spectrum management by the federal government without endangering the mission-critical operations of the Department of Defense. Coordination among the agencies can be difficult and it can be slow. Proactive communication among all stakeholders, I believe, is key for that better coordination. And that's why, as ranking member of the Strategic Force Subcommittee, I sent a letter to the subcommittee chairman, with the subcommittee chairman, Angus King, to the Department of Defense last year, that ask for more details about the department's concerns with proposed spectrum reallocation in the lower 3G. DOD's response pointed to the 2020 IDA report, but there's still far more details that we need to learn about what may or may not work for reallocation in this band. Fortunately, there is an ongoing study, and I appreciate that, the PATH study, that should provide those details. General Milley, my time is almost up, and I expect my friend from South Dakota will have a conversation with you about this as well. But for the record, and please answer yes or no, is it your best military advice that the ongoing PATH study, as currently authorized, should be completed in order to inform the ongoing spectrum negotiations?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Before I recognize Senator Gilliland, let me just remind all of my colleagues there will be a classified hearing in the SCIF SVC 217 at the conclusion of this open hearing. Senator Gilliland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McCord, I was disappointed that for the second year in a row, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, was not fully funded in the department's budget request. Understanding that we cannot get into specific budget figures in this forum, can you discuss why AARO was not fully funded?
Senator, I don't have any information from my colleague, Undersecretary Moultrie, that he needed additional funding in this area. It's a relatively new office we're standing up, so I was under the impression, I am under the impression that we have adequate funding for the relatively new state of this, but I will double back with him if there's a concern.
I need you to send a letter to this committee in writing about why it wasn't fully funded. Several senators signed a letter to Secretary Hicks asking that it be fully funded in this budget, and we specified in a classified annex exactly what funding wasn't being met. And it's operational funding. It's basic operational funding. So I'm highly concerned about this. Secretary Austin, the incidents last month involving the Chinese high-altitude balloon and the 3 unknown objects highlighted the need for us to continue to improve our understanding of UAPs over U.S. airspace. Do you intend to ensure AARO receives full funding in the future?
I will, Senator, and in this budget, we've asked for $11 million in support of the office of that initiative.
That is not the budget request.
Okay.
Will you investigate why the budget request isn't being met and be part of the response to the committee?
I will.
Thank you. Secretary Austin, on March 7, Qin Gang, the Chinese foreign minister, said that the U.S. and China are heading toward inevitable, quote, confrontation and conflict, end of quote. This comes as the STRATCOM commander testified that the PRC seeks to match or in some areas surpass quantitative and qualitative parity with the United States in terms of nuclear weapons, end of quote. During the Cold War, the U.S. and the Soviet Union developed lines of communication to prevent escalation or outright hostilities during heightened tensions and developed norms and mechanisms to avoid miscalculations. How would you characterize your relationship with your PRC counterpart, and what steps are you taking to reduce the risk of miscalculations during a period of heightened competition between our countries?
Well, thanks, Senator. I think you've heard me say 2 things. The first thing is that what the chairman said earlier, that I don't see conflict as being imminent or inevitable. But I do think it's important that leaders and great powers have the ability to talk to each other, to manage escalation, to manage crisis. You've seen me reach out to my former counterpart, Minister of Defense Wei, who has now moved on, and encourage him to keep the lines of communication open. He has now been replaced by a new minister, and I've yet to have the ability to engage him, but I will continue to make sure that we reach out. I do think that's critical.
Secretary Austin, we have international legal structures to address the conduct of our forces in war. While we have international treaties that govern the use of space, there's ongoing debate about whether these treaties would apply during an armed conflict and what types of counter-space weapons are permissible. What steps is the department taking in coordination with the Department of State to reinforce international norms and whether we can safely rely on our use of space assets both legally and lethally during a conflict?
Well, this is an issue that interagency of our administration, we continue to engage on, and Secretary Blinken, as you know, also has engaged our allies and partners on this issue at the UN and in other fora. We think it's important. The administration thinks it's important, and this is something that we'll continue to work on. So.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate the policies you issued on March 22nd supporting our military families, and it's critical to their well-being and ability to retain strong military force. DoD's own surveys show that 24% of our service members experience food insecurity. Last year, I met with military families on Staten Island who spoke about the challenges they face in basically putting food on the table to feed their kids. However, very few service members are considered eligible for basic needs allowance or the BNA under existing BNA programs, since BAH is included in family income calculations. Can you tell me how you intend to ensure that food insecurity in military families have access to the BNA or other measures?
Well, we'll have the authority next year to move to a higher number, a higher percentage, 150%. We'll actually move before we're required to move. We plan to move in July. That will allow us to help more families. But you've seen us, with your support, Senator, you've seen us ask for a pay raise last year of 4.6%. You've seen us raise BAH amounts, and you've seen us work to get child care costs down. So we're trying to increase the resources and reduce the strain on families, and hopefully that total equation will create benefits for our families and our troops.
But will you consider removing BAH from the calculation for BNA?
We will do whatever feasible, what we're allowed to do by law.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. Senator Cotton, please.
Mr. Secretary, I want to return to the issue of the strikes in Syria last week and Senator Wicker's line of questioning about the timing of notification to Congress. You said that you, quote, should have notified Congress earlier. These attacks happened against our troops, killing one contractor early in the morning Eastern time. Do you believe that you should have notified us that morning while we were voting on amendments directly related to this kind of attack?
Again, there is no connection between when we notified you, Senator, and your vote. The chairman and I were testifying that morning as well. So as soon as we came out of testimony, we began work on crafting response options.
Secretary Austin, I don't believe you. I believe that your office specifically withheld notification of this deadly strike against Americans because the Rubio Amendment, on which we voted midday, directly touched on exactly this scenario, not repealing these use of force resolutions if the president couldn't certify that Iran was no longer attacking us in Iran and Syria. That's what I believe. Nothing you can say is going to change my belief about that. And I got to say, I think I speak for about a lot of my colleagues.
I just want to say, Senator, that is absolutely not true.
Maybe you didn't personally do it. Maybe you didn't personally do it. But I believe entirely that people in your office did that. You have a vast legislative operation, as Senator Wicker pointed out. Do you really expect us to believe that they didn't know that we were voting on a Rubio amendment that directly covered exactly this kind of attack? I don't believe that. I don't believe it. I believe there's a conscious decision made not to inform Congress because you fear that it might lead to the passage of the Rubio amendment, which would kill the entire bill. But I want to move on to a more important part, which is these attacks in the first place. How many attacks has Iran or its proxies launched against American positions in Iran and Syria since Joe Biden took office?
There's been about 83 attacks, I think, since in the last several years.
That's a lot of attacks over 2 years. How many times have we retaliated against Iran or its proxies?
We've launched 4 major strikes, Senator, but an attack can consist of a number of things. It can consist of, a rocket that's fired in the direction of one of our bases, but not effective.
Mr. Secretary, I'm well aware of what an attack could entail. So 79 and 4 is Iran's record right now. And our 4 attacks have not been against Iran, right? They've been against Iran's proxies in Iraq or Syria or elsewhere. Is that correct?
This last attack was against IRGC Quds Force infrastructure. And
okay. And after we retaliated, Iran attacked us again, injuring another American, didn't it?
They did.
And have we retaliated for that attack on Friday?
We have not yet, Senator.
So what kind of signal do we think this sends to Iran when they can attack us 83 times since Joe Biden has become president and we only respond 4? Maybe it's because they know that that we will not retaliate until they kill an American, which emboldens them to keep launching these attacks which kill Americans. What is our rules of engagement for on-the-ground commanders throughout the region? Are they allowed to engage immediately if their position has been attacked?
They can, and they do, and there have been several instances of that, Senator.
I've got to say, I've heard from company and field grade commanders who've been in the region very recently, and they say there's a lot of confusion over that. Let me move to a related topic, and that's our operations of unmanned aircraft in the Black Sea. Russia downed one of our Reaper aircraft a couple of weeks ago. Have we flown those aircrafts into the exact same space since it was downed?
We have flown on the paths that we want to fly in the Black Sea to collect intelligence information.
So that is that's far from a yes answer. I said, have we flown in the same airspace? You've said we've flown in the paths we want to fly to collect intelligence. So have we adjusted our flight patterns? Have we moved down to that airspace?
We will fly the paths that we feel necessary to collect intelligence information.
So according to an administration official from an article in CNN on March 21st, we're not flying in that airspace to, quote, to avoid being too provocative. So are we removing our aircraft out of the space from which that Reaper flew because we don't want to be too provocative towards Russia?
Senator, you may have heard me say immediately after this incident that I told my counterpart that we're going to fly the skies, the international skies, and sail the seas as we wish. And so we continue to fly in that airspace.
In the exact same airspace where that Reaper was downed?
Again,
you haven't pulled back from Crimea or from the Ukrainian or the Russian coasts?
I recommend we take this to a closed
We can. I think it answers the question, though, and it gets to the point I'm trying to make here. We continue to deter ourselves against our adversaries. We let Iran launch 83 attacks against us. We only respond 4 times. Russia downs one of our aircraft, and we pull back from that airspace, just like we've been delaying ballistic missile tests over the last 2 years, or over the last year, just like we let a Chinese spy balloon float across the country when we could have downed it across the Aleutians. Now, I don't necessarily think these are Secretary of Defense calls. I think these are Commander-in-Chief calls. But we shouldn't be surprised when our adversaries get emboldened and more aggressive in all these theaters when we continue to deter ourselves.
Have you finished, sir? Thank you, Senator Cotton. Let me recognize Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your service, not only over many decades, but in this role in particular at a time when the threats are as great as any time that most of us can remember. I've been to Ukraine 3 times over roughly the last year, visiting Kyiv and President Zelensky, and recently followed you, Mr. Secretary, to visit our base in Bavaria, where we are training Ukrainian fighters in the use of Bradley armored vehicles and combined arms. And the bond between our soldiers and their fighters is extraordinary because of our respect for their will to fight. And that's what I've seen in the Ukrainian people. They will fight with pitchforks if necessary, but they need a lot more. And I want to thank you and the President for committing to do whatever it takes. I think I'm almost quoting exactly. And in my view, whatever it takes includes airplanes, aircraft. Would you agree that as a strictly military matter, and you know a lot more about this than most of us at this side of the table, that that kind of air support from the United States is going to be necessary, and the sooner the better?
Thanks, Senator. First of all, thanks for your continued support and for the support of Congress. It's phenomenal what we've been able to do and what we've helped Ukraine be the kinds of effects they've been able to achieve based upon our support. And as you know, the United States of America leads the way on that. We talk to our counterparts every week, sometimes multiple times a week, and I meet with them in person every month. What they need right now, more than anything else, is air defense. And that is the critical need on the battlefield. And they also need long-range fires and armored capability. And we are providing them a real substantial package of capability in terms of platforms, but not just that, we're also providing training, and we're providing sustainment. And sir, you witnessed some of that coming together when you were in Grafenwehr, and I really appreciate you going out there and visiting our troops. But I think those capabilities will make the biggest difference in the near term, and they must be successful, going forward. We know the spring fighting season's in front of us here, and we want to make sure that they have what they need to be successful.
And I apologize for interrupting, Mr. Secretary, but I want to come back to the aircraft because, as you've identified it very clearly, and I agree totally, air defense is critical. We have a narrow window of time, and in fact, this spring will be crucial, and some of our allies are providing planes, but we have the resources, and only we really have the resources to provide the aircraft necessary for fully robust air defense.
So if you're talking F-16s, whenever you make that decision, in order to put together what needs to be put together to provide that capability, is going to be 18 months or so in the making. And that won't help in this current fight. Will they have a capability at some point down the road? We all believe that they will. And what that looks like, it could look like F-16s, it could look like some other fourth-generation aircraft, but we will continue to work with our allies and partners to make sure that Ukraine has what it needs.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And again, I want to thank you and the President for your commitment, which I think is deeply appreciated by the people of Ukraine as well. I want to focus on a very narrow issue relating to procurement, which is the helicopter acquisition and development for the FLRAA contract. A number of my colleagues and myself had asked the Army for an explanation for the award of that contract to Bell. It's under challenge right now. Will you commit to provide us with an adequate explanation? So far, the Army has been totally unforthcoming.
I will commit, Senator, once the protest is resolved, we will make sure you get a thorough briefing on this issue.
Shouldn't we have it now rather than at some indefinite point in the future?
Well, sir, you know that it's inappropriate to while this is under protest to do that. So I commit to you that as soon as we can, we'll provide you that information.
Thank you. I want to ask one last question. Suicide among our service members continues to be a desperately important problem. I will be meeting later today or this week with the family of Master of Arms Seaman recruit Xavier Mitchell Sandor, who took his own life while he was stationed on the USS George Washington. He was among 3 who committed suicide while that ship was under maintenance and repair. Similar kinds of suicides have happened on other ships under similar circumstances. The report is still outstanding. There have been no completion of the investigation a year after that event. I know you're very concerned about the troops. Nobody cares more than you do about the well-being, and I include the chairman in that sentiment. Can you tell us that additional measures will be taken and that there will be a report forthcoming about Xavier Sandor?
I will. I will make sure that Secretary Del Toro ensures that this investigation moves out in a timely fashion and in a very thorough fashion. I would also tell you that I've asked Secretary Del Toro to make sure that he is personally focused on this issue, specifically related to ships that are in maintenance and the berthing associated with those ships. He has, in this budget, Senator, asked for some $258 billion to address that issue, and I think that's a good start. But I think we need to continue to make sure our leadership's doing the right thing, that we have adequate housing for our young men and women. They are our national assets. And I truly believe that he will remain focused on this, but I will as well. So.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Rounds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by thanking all of you for your service to our country, recognizing Secretary Austin, not just for your time in uniform, but your time as Secretary as well. General Milley, recognizing your time as Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, but not only that, but the amount of time that you and your family have served our country. We sometimes gloss over that, and I recognize that I don't have a lot of time, but I just want to make this clear. It's not just the time that you spend in the Pentagon, it's the time that you've spent boots on the ground. You've had operational deployments, including the Multinational Force and Observers, Sinai, Egypt, Operation Just Cause in Panama, Operation Uphold Democracy in Haiti, Operation Joint Endeavor, Bosnia, Operation Iraqi Freedom in Iraq, and 3 tours during Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. You've also deployed to Somalia and Colombia. We thank you for your service to our country, sir, and your family as well, because when you deploy, they're deployed as well. Thank you. Gentlemen, both for Secretary Austin and Chairman Milley, last week you both clarified that you support waiting until the conclusion of the ongoing study before any decision should be made on auctioning parts of or any of the 3.1 to 3.45 gigahertz spectrum band. My question is, should an auction occur before the study is complete, what are the real-world impacts on national security from a defense and budgetary perspective?
They would be devastating, Senator, and it would take us somewhere north of 20 years to try to recover from the loss of that spectrum. Parts of that spectrum are vital to our national defense and the protection of the homeland. And in order to describe exactly, well, you know what the specific platforms are, but we would have to go to a classified session to speak in detail about this. But I would tell you that this is not something you can fix overnight once you break it. It'll take 20 years plus to recover from that.
Thank you. General Milley?
Same thing, Senator. I firmly believe that we should wait till the study is. This is a measure twice, cut once sort of thing. We don't want to vacate it because of the severe national security implications to that. Sharing is obviously a goal for everybody, but it's how you share and the technical capability to do that, and that's what the study should tell us. We want to make a fully informed decision, and the Secretary and I will be making those recommendations in writing to the President when the time comes.
Thank you, sir. Once again, for Chairman Milley, as the principal military advisor to the President, would you say that it's essential for you to be able to provide an independent recommendation about spectrum sharing and its impact on national security to the President?
Yes, I do. I would also say, though, that every recommendation I make to the President is an independent best military advice, no matter what the topic. The Secretary is very good about that, and I will always inform the Secretary if I disagree with the Secretary ahead of time. But he and I always are in there together with the President, and I will always make an independent best military advice recommendation. That's what I signed when I was confirmed, that I would do that with the Senate as part of this committee, as part of becoming the confirmation process. So I will always do that, and every chairman should always do that.
Thank you, sir. Secretary Austin, INDOPACOM has listed an unfunded requirement of $147 million for the development of a missile defense system for Guam. Can you discuss how that decision by the department not to fund this INDOPACOM requirement comports with the department's priority to defend Guam?
Thanks, Senator. As you know, we have and we continue to invest heavily in the defense of Guam, and that work is ongoing. Again, there are always choices that we have to make in a specific time horizon, and in this case, that is a capability that I think we can and will consider going forward.
I think part of the reason for the question is because there's been some criticism on the department providing a list of unfunded requests. Would you agree that this one should be very seriously considered by Congress?
As you know, Senator, we are required, or the service chiefs and commanders are required by law to submit those unfunded requests, and I do believe that all of our commanders and chiefs believe that what's on there is important. Now, I've asked our commanders and our chiefs to make sure that they build their requirements for readiness and also combat capability into their base budget. And so we try to do that at every turn, but that's, at some point in time, there are choices that you have to make. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. Senator Hirono, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank all three of you for being here today, and especially for General Milley. Thank you very much for your 43 years of continuous service. I extend to you my thanks and respect. For Secretary Austin, investments in the military's infrastructure are directly correlated to our readiness and ability to execute deterrence. However, as the people of Hawaii saw from the disaster at Red Hill, military infrastructure also impacts our cities and towns. Fuel, chemical, and sewage spills have lasting impacts on our lands and erode the trust of service members and their communities. We must invest in the systems they rely on each day, basic things like pipelines, power grids, and barracks. Yet this year in Hawaii alone, there is over $500 million in unfunded infrastructure improvements on the service's unfunded priorities list. Secretary Austin, how is the department ensuring that infrastructure maintenance and modernization needs are met before disasters like Red Hill occur? And basically, don't we need to get more of these projects off unfunded priorities lists?
These are, to your point, Senator, requirements that are critical, and they should be met as soon as possible. In my budget, I've asked for $5.1 billion to increase operational effectiveness and survivability. Now, part of that has to do with the effects that are caused by climate, but nonetheless, you know, those effects are real effects, and so we will continue to invest in this. But to your point, services should invest in this to make sure that the infrastructure they need to support them is, in fact, you know, first rate. So.
Secretary Austin, you know that I have been very much focused on those kinds of infrastructure needs. What comes out of our pipes? So with the electricity staying on, those continue to capture my attention, and be assured that I will continue to focus on these issues and the needs being met. Mr. Secretary, in your tenure, you have issued several policies that increase service members' access to child care, which you have mentioned, institute parental leave, which is very popular, and ensure access to reproductive health care for all women, no matter where they are stationed. These are prudent changes that put our people first, and I appreciate your leadership on these issues. Secretary Austin, how did you identify these service member needs? And once those requirements were recorded, what was the process to implement updated policies?
Well, I talk to our troops. I talk to the family members. You know, as I go around the country and around the world, you know, I'm very much interested in what their challenges are and how we can do things to make life better for them. And with your help, we've been able to do some things. And that includes the things that you've mentioned, Senator, but also the pay raises, the raise in BAH and BAS. And we're asking you for another pay raise this year, probably the biggest pay raise for our troops and civilians in decades. But that's how I get the input, by engaging the troops and the family members.
You have been heavily criticized for your decisions to enable particularly women service members to attain reproductive health. And I, for one, commend you for that. And I want you to stay the course. In the same vein of wanting to support our service members, I do want to mention that there is the potential for significant cuts to the cost of living of Hawaii service members. And I've noted this before. And I think that these huge cuts for Hawaii service members are unjust and unfair. And I hope that there will be a reconsideration of that decision. I also want to note, I have been asking about missile defense of Hawaii for quite some time. I had a productive meeting yesterday with leaders from your staff about their roles in and plans for the current and future missile defense of Hawaii. While there is certainly more work to be done to establish and execute a long-term plan for the missile defense of Hawaii, I am encouraged to see the department treating this issue with the seriousness it demands. I remain focused on it, on the issue, as I request updates from your staff. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rono. Senator Ernst, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to state for the record that I am adamantly opposed to the DOD's new policy on allowing travel expenses for those that are going to other states to seek abortions. I think it's incredibly important that we remain adherent to the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits taxpayer dollars from going towards abortions. I know this is an extension of travel services for family members and those service members, but again, those are taxpayer dollars being spent to fund the extension of an abortion. I am adamantly opposed. I know that there are others that are on this committee that agree as well. We're not saying that women can't seek abortions. They can do that, but that is to be privately funded. So thank you both, gentlemen, for being here this morning. And Secretary, I do worry that there's a mismatch between strategy and resources at the heart of the president's budget. The National Defense Strategy calls this a, quote, decisive decade and commits to act urgently to strengthen deterrence against the pacing threat, China. So, General Milley, would investments in posture presence and lethal capabilities like long-range fires reduce our risk in the Western Pacific?
Absolutely. Long-range fires would reduce our risk, not only Western Pacific, but anywhere, but for sure, yeah, that's correct.
Thank you, General Milley. So I know that you addressed this with Senator Rounds, but Secretary Austin, as we discuss those unfunded requirements, we see that we are $3.5 billion short in the Indo-PACOM, which includes critical strike capabilities and posture enhancements. So I do hope that this is something we can work with those commanders on those requirements. I think it's incredibly important, and I know my colleague from Alaska may address requirements in defending Taiwan, but it is incredibly important. If we are saying in the National Defense Strategy that this is a decisive decade, we need to act accordingly, and as Congress, we must fund accordingly. Chairman Milley, as you know, our Special Operations Forces are a strategic capability, and how can SOF help deter and defeat great power competitors?
Well, for Special Forces, regardless of theater, relative to a great power competitor, there's ongoing intense competition in the so-called gray space. They play a key role in that area. In addition to that, they can provide tremendous capability in train, advise, assist in indigenous partners and allies in region. That's important. Also, I would argue that irregular warfare is often an overlooked component, and as you start looking at larger conventional war, irregular warfare plays a very key role in all forms of war, and that will play a key role in any great power war as well. So those are some of the key things. There's strategic reconnaissance, there's the development of the battle-space advanced force operations, the whole litmus test or a litany of capabilities that Special Operations Forces bring that have a direct role prior to the onset of hostilities and can contribute to the deterrence of war with any great power.
Very good, and I appreciate that because you answered my next question about surrogate forces and partnering with those forces in indigenous actors, and they do help SOF compete against great powers, so I do appreciate that. Secretary Austin, will the department's guidance to the SOF enterprise place our great power competition above counterterrorism and crisis response missions?
I'm sorry, Senator, I missed the question there.
Yes, SOF, as it applies to great power competition, will you be placing their mission with great power competition over the other mission of deterring terrorism?
We have to strike a balance, and we see our SOF forces doing that. I know you've talked to our Special Operations Force combatant commander. He is looking at this in a very methodical way and making sure that he maintains a balance of capability that can serve both challenges there, and they're doing a great job. And I've seen some of our Tier 1 forces very rapidly transition and start thinking about how they're going to be relevant, not just thinking about it, but developing capability to be relevant in great power competition. At the same time, keeping a good handle on transnational terrorist organizations.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think it's incredibly important that we continue to fund our SOF as necessary, because they do strike a balance between great power competition, working in that gray zone, and also deterring terrorism around the globe. So I would just encourage members of this committee to continue to focus on the strength within our SOF forces. Chairman Milley, thank you very much for your service to our great United States Army, as well as the Joint Force, and also my best wishes to Holly Ann. We know that behind every great leader is someone who supports them thoroughly, and she has been a tremendous force in working with our Gold Star families, with all of the members of their service and their families. So my best wishes to you and your entire family. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. Senator Kane, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. General Milley, I also want to compliment you on your stellar career, and I also offer the congratulations of your college classmate, my wife, Ann, who I mentioned I would see you today, and she wanted me to extend her congratulations as well. On the 15th of the month, during our Personnel Subcommittee hearing, Senator Kelly and I asked Secretaries Cisneros and Martinez-Lopez about implementation of the Brandon Act. I appreciate both of you in your opening statements talked about the need to get a hold of military suicide issues and resources that are being devoted to this. We asked the secretaries about Brandon Act implementation and also about a report on Brandon Act implementation that we were supposed to receive that is overdue. I don't really want to get into that with you here today, but just to put it on the radar screen that during the course of the development of the NDAA, we really want to get into the implementation of the Brandon Act that we passed, make sure that it's being implemented, find out if there are things we can do to make that implementation easier. And I really want to work on that between now and the time that we take up the NDAA in committee. It's possible that we don't need to do anything more on that space if we're convinced that implementation is moving out. If we're not convinced of that, we'll need to do more. And I just wanted to kind of put that on the record to begin. Secretary, I also want to ask you about your recent trip to Iraq. I think it was either 2 or 3 weeks ago that you were there, and the reports suggest you had productive meetings both with political leadership, Prime Minister al-Sudani, but also with military leadership. Could you describe that visit for the committee?
Well, first of all, let me tell you that our troops are doing well there, and they are enabling and helping their hosts, the Iraqi security forces, and they're very much valued by the Iraqi leadership. The Prime Minister was very complimentary of their performance and the value that they add. Good meeting with the Prime Minister and his leadership. I think it's not only me, but other leaders in the region are also saying that the Prime Minister shows a lot of promise in terms of a person that's willing to work with others to move things forward. So.
Describe the current state of the mill-to-mill relationship. Talking about the Prime Minister discussions, but we've got about 2,500 U.S. troops in Iraq. As you point out, we are being hosted. We are there at the invitation of the Iraqi government because they value the United States as a partner. Describe a little bit about the current mill-to-mill relationship.
I think the mill-to-mill relationship, Senator, is good, really good. And again, I think our partners understand the value that we add to their overall effort. And if you unplug that, then what happens with their efforts to maintain pressure on ISIS, what happens with their efforts to continue to develop their professional force. And so I think we're very much appreciated, and what I saw was goodness. I think the commander there is doing all of the right things and working in conjunction with the ambassador to continue to move things forward. So I was really encouraged by what I saw.
You've had a number of chapters in Iraq in 2003, and then in 2010, and then as CENTCOM commander. And some of these chapters are with an Iraq that was an adversary of the United States. How would you characterize this relationship? We're there at their invitation, and now we seem to be working in partnership to help them advance security in their country and in the region.
It truly is remarkable, and you cheated me on one of the rotations there. I had 3 rotations to Iraq. But,
I left one out?
This is something that has developed over time, and it's developed in a very meaningful way. It hadn't always been easy. It's been lumpy from time to time. But I think we're in a pretty good place now, and this is something that we're going to have to work on each and every day. And we know, Senator, that not every person in Iraq believes that, that Americans ought to be there, but the government is very much appreciative of what we bring and what we're doing to train and enable their forces. So, I think we're in a pretty good place.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Secretary. I think that's important. One of the capacities the U.S. has shown throughout our history is to use a biblical phrase, to beat a sword into a plowshare, to take a nation that was an enemy, and over time, and as you point out, bumpy, not always smooth, but over time, turn the relationship into one of partnership, not one of being an adversary. And that's an important aspect of the U.S.-Iraq relationship, and it also sends a message to others that's something that the United States can do and we can be proud of. I appreciate your testimony. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Senator Kane. Senator Kramer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both, all three, for your service. A special thank you, General Milley, for your decades of service. I want to jump down to talking back about Ukraine a little bit. There have been a lot of reasons, rationale, excuses, perhaps, for not providing certain advanced weapon systems, some legitimate, I'm sure, maybe all of them, I don't know. But, of course, oftentimes it leads to eventually providing them. But one system we've never offered, and I haven't heard a lot of talk about it, are the MQ-9s. But seeing how we just lost one recently in the Black Sea, where it's probably more likely to be recovered by Russia than the United States, and the fact that the Air Force wants to retire 48 older MQ-9s, is there any chance that the MQ-9 would be a reasonable system to offer Ukraine? Either one, or maybe start with Secretary Austin.
Yeah, as we look at this, Senator, as you know, that air domain is a very hostile airspace because of the capability that the Russians have for air defense. Mm-hmm. And it is not a survivable platform if they try to use that in that environment.
General Milley, you'd agree?
Yeah, that's number one. It's not survivable. It's big and slow. It's going to get nailed by the Russian air defense systems. And in terms of its capabilities, I'm not sure what it'll get you beyond the smaller, faster, more nimble UAV systems that we are providing, as well as some other countries are providing. So I think that it's a good system for certain uses in certain environments, but in the current situation in Ukraine, it may not be the best system.
Thank you. Secretary Austin, I want to now go to back to China a little bit. And you're probably familiar with what I consider the nearly year and a half of torment that the city of Grand Forks went through while considering an investment by the Chinese Communist Party investors of Fufang, which would have provided a wet corn milling facility 12 miles from the Grand Forks Air Force Base, 12 miles from the 319th Reconnaissance Wing, and now an SDA ground station for low Earth orbiting satellites. After sort of cutting the deal and then going to CFIUS, where CFIUS spent 60 days determining they didn't have jurisdiction. And finally, after, 14 months or so of all of this, the Air Force finally came out and said it would present a significant risk. And that, I think, has helped kill the project, although I understand there's now a 90-day pause. my hope for all of that is not only that Grand Forks avoided an unfortunate situation, but that many other communities might avoid it as well. Could you talk to us just a little bit about either in the context of Fufang and Grand Forks or the broader context of, are we giving adequate cover and information and coaching perhaps to other communities around the country? Because it's my understanding that this is not necessarily a unique circumstance to Grand Forks.
Well, first of all, Senator, let me thank you for your personal leadership on this issue. To the point that you're making, this applies to installations all around the United States of America. And we will continue to emphasize to service chiefs, commanders, secretaries, and that we have to be vigilant about what's going on outside of our fences. We got to work with the communities to make sure that we do have some kind of situational awareness, and we have to advocate for the protection of our bases and installations. And again, every one of these cases will be complex, but there are cases that we must take on. But thanks for your leadership in this area.
Well, I appreciate you saying it that way, actually, because I think you're right. I think we need to, quote, take them on, and rather than sort of punt them to the CFIUS process or some other political process, particularly when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party and their involvement and their ability, not just ability, but obvious willingness to do recon in all sorts of manners and ways. And so I appreciate that. And my hope, like I said, is that the experience that Grand Forks went through is not just in vain to the rest of the country, but rather that perhaps sheds a light on this issue throughout the country. So thank you for that. And again, thank you, General Milley, for your decades of service, and I yield. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kramer. Senator Warren, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your service to our nation. This year's Department of Defense requests an $842 billion budget, one of the largest budgets in history. Now, despite the massive size of this budget request, the committee is already receiving letters from various parts of DOD saying that they need billions of dollars more. DOD calls these unfunded priority lists. I call them wish lists, and I'm concerned about how they distort our budget process. So, Secretary Austin, if I could, let me ask this directly. Are you comfortable with the figure in the President's proposed budget that it is sufficient to meet our defense and national security objectives?
I am, Senator. As you know, we made this budget request based upon our strategy. Our request is directly linked to the capabilities that we need to execute our strategy. And we spent a lot of time on that. I've asked the commanders and service chiefs to make sure that they go after warfighting capability and readiness in their base budget, and for the most part, we've done that. But again, we are required by law.
I understand. So we're going to go there. We're going to go there, Mr. Secretary. Now, Secretary Gates understood that leaders at DOD can always find a gap or a requirement to justify asking for what he called however many billions dollars more you want. He reduced wish lists by about 90%, and he was able to do this during the surge in Afghanistan. Secretary Austin, you have a unique perspective here because before you were Secretary of Defense, you were the commander of a major combatant command, a job that is now held by the people who are asking for unfunded priorities. When Secretary Gates cut these unfunded lists down, you were commanding general of U.S. forces in Iraq. Secretary Austin, did our national security suffer when Secretary Gates cut down the service wish lists?
I can say that while we were in Iraq and Afghanistan, we, based upon the support of Congress, we had what we needed to be able to prosecute our operations, and so we didn't go we didn't want for much of anything. So.
Okay, so let's talk then about the budget process. Each combatant commander thinks about how they could spend more money than you have allocated to them in this process that you describe. I assume these combatant commanders act in absolute good faith, but they have a narrow perspective. Secretary Austin, in putting together the overall budget, you have to weigh our global national security priorities. Do the commanders submitting these wish lists have to do the same?
They are primarily focused on their region and what they would like to have for their region in order to be successful. So, but again,
I take that as a no.
right.
Yes, all right. As my colleagues on this committee are well aware, I've been using these budget posture hearings to ask combatant commanders, folks who occupy the roles like the one you used to serve, about these lists, and almost all of them have defended their requests, although the justifications vary. 3 of them said they needed the items on this list to address unexpected threats that couldn't be considered in the budget process. But these same commanders often repeat the same requests year after year after year, suggesting that if there were a real need, they would have worked it into the underlying budget. Secretary Austin, does DoD have sufficient tools to address emerging threats without relying on the unfunded priorities list?
We do, and again, we account for that as we built the budget.
Okay, and one last question. Do you support removing the statutory requirement to send Congress these lists every year? And if so, are you confident that we could do so without jeopardizing national security?
I would support that, Senator.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I would also like to submit a letter for the record from Undersecretary McCord supporting my bill with Senator King, Senator Lee, and Senator Braun to end the statutory requirement for these lists. As he notes in the letter, these lists are, quote, not an effective way to illuminate our joint priorities. We don't let any other part of federal government behave this way, and it is for a good reason. The budget process requires making tough choices. I appreciate that the Secretary leads in that, and I would like to submit this for the record, Mr.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Tuberville, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, thank you for being here. Thank you for your service. Secretary Austin, thank you for your service and your call last week. Secretary McCord, thanks for being here today. Not getting a lot of questions, but thanks for being here. You know, I ran for Senate to serve on this committee. I ran because my dad, he was a World War II veteran. He earned 5 Bronze Stars and a Purple Heart, and he died on active duty. And I ran to support the warfighter. You know, we owe our freedom to our troops. For 50 years, our all-volunteer force has answered the call. I think you would agree to that. Since 1973, we've asked a lot of our Americans' young volunteers to fight in Vietnam, Grenada, Bosnia, Somalia, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and Afghanistan. They've never wavered. In boom times and in bust, young Americans have raised their right hands to defend the Constitution with their lives, if necessary. War is hell. You know that better than anybody. Every recruit should know that. But in the last 2 years, we put them through a different kind of hell. In one of your first acts, Mr. Secretary, you put our military, every single member, active duty and reserve, through a mandatory training to root out extremists. That sent a message, Mr. Secretary, that our military is filled with extremists. Our military is one of the most diverse organizations in the world. It is full of patriots. 8 months later, we watched the collapse of Afghanistan. It was the worst defeat of the United States in my lifetime, and agony for most Americans to watch on the 20th anniversary of September the 11th. That defeat gutted our troops who served there. The President called it an extraordinary success. That's not what our veterans of Afghanistan call it. Our withdrawal, a big letdown to our allies, a military disaster, and national disgrace. I've talked to leaders all over the world. They've told me the same thing. Not one general or political appointee has been held accountable. Now, I want to give you an example of accountability. General Milley, May 2021, I sent you a letter asking for, why did we give up Bagram? Now, you did answer, but it was a few months later. Now, you have 4,500 people, you know, for the next person in line on the joint staff and a budget of $250 million. We've got to find ways to get information back to Congress. Secretary Austin, I sent you a question in September 2021 that took almost 4 months. Congress deserves better. America deserves better. We all deserve better. Now we're on the brink of a world war with Russia. China is openly violating our airspace, but it took Congress to step in and tell our military leaders, you, to stop throwing our troops out who objected to a vaccine, most of them on a religious factor. Given what we put our troops through in the past 2 years, it's no wonder that the Army missed its goal of 15,000 soldiers. Now, General, you know that is an entire division. We can't afford that. And it's getting worse. The Navy and Air Force will probably miss their numbers this year. Yet some of my colleagues claim that the real crisis is my hold on the promotion of 158 general flag officers. Mind you, these were promotions that the majority leader can bring to the floor at any time. Those same people claim expanding abortion will make our military stronger. You know, I want to be clear on this. My hold has nothing to do with the Supreme Court's decision to the access of abortion. This is about not forcing the taxpayers of this country to fund abortion. That's been a bipartisan consensus for more than 40 years. The military has performed abortions for years. All were cases of rape, incest, and the harm to the mom. Over the past 40 years, I don't recall one military person ever complaining that we weren't performing enough abortions. Nor did the military raise the alarm that our servicemen and women were being placed in areas that had restrictive policies on abortion. Poland's restrictive policies, Japan, Djibouti, all these theaters have abortion policy. Yet our military changed the policy to do this job in these different theaters. As of 12 days ago, y'all got the American taxpayer on the hook to pay for travel and time off for elective abortions. And you did not make this with anybody in this room or Congress taking a vote. In fact, this contradicts what Congress has actually voted for. Most of us, some of us in the room, if not all senators that have been complaining about this, have voted for the Hyde Amendment many, many times. But now my colleagues on the left think this abortion issue is good for a campaign, and that's what this shouldn't be about. I'm not going to let our military be politicized. I want our military to be the strongest and the deadliest it has ever been, but I also want the administration to follow the law. As long as I have a voice in this body, Congress will write the laws, not the Secretary of Defense, not the Joint Chiefs. General, you said nothing's more expensive than preparing for war or fighting a war. I truly agree. That's the reason if we want something to spend money on, let's pass it and let's put it in the NDAA. You know, I represent Alabama, but I also represent everybody in this country. Everybody, all 320 million. All of us do. Y'all represent the military, but you also are responsible and represent every citizen in this country. That's the reason this country is so strong. And we all need to understand that, get on the same page. I'm willing to work with you. I'm not here to fight. Hey, I'm here, we're all on the same team. And I want to work with you to make this happen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think it's appropriate that the Secretary or the General have a reason to respond.
Well, thank you, sir. And first of all, let me just say thanks for the support you've given us to this point. And I really implore you to reconsider and allow our nominations to move forward. It will make a significant difference for our force. Just to address a couple of things that you mentioned. First of all, you said that you know I had our troops focus on rooting out extremism, and nothing could be further from the truth. You know, each of our units, troops, spent a couple of hours talking about a number of things. We've always had regulations against extremist behavior. And you've heard me say that 99.9% of our troops are focused on the right things each and every day. But in this case, a small set of actions can have outsized impact. On the vaccine mandate, the vaccine mandate, in my view, saved lives. And it saved a lot of lives. And so You know, we don't see a strong correlation between vaccine mandate and recruiting. We don't see that because we've done the surveys that indicate that that's just not true. There's not a strong correlation. Now, on the issue of providing non-covered reproductive health care for our women, I would just say, Senator, almost 1 in 5 of our troops are women. And they don't get a chance to choose where they're stationed. So almost 80,000 of our women are stationed in places where they don't have access to non-covered reproductive health care. And I heard from our troops, I heard from our senior leaders, I heard from our chiefs and also our secretaries, and this policy is based on strong legal grounds. And it is not a law, it is a policy. And so, you know, we obviously don't pass laws in the Department of Defense, but again, I assure you that we have great respect for this body, Congress, and we will do everything within our power to make sure that we continue to work with Congress. Again, you've supported us in a number of ways, Senator. I am personally grateful for that support, and I know my colleagues are as well, but thank you.
Let me recognize Senator Manchin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of you for your service and for being here today to testify. I first want to say to General Milley, I want to take a moment to thank you for your 43 years of service, the commitment to our country, and the dedication and sacrifice your family has made for that with you able to serve. And I look forward to you having enjoyment in retirement and your second career. I know whatever it'll be something special, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. Secretary Austin, multiple sources, including retired general officers and National Defense Industrial Association, American Enterprise Institute, and your colleague, Mr. McCord, have all recognized the damage failing to pass a budget on time has both in our national security and the taxpayers. What I'm trying to get to, and Mr. McCord, no one knows better than you how damaging delays in CRs have they been. Previously, you noted that from fiscal year 91 to 2010, the average delay for defense appropriation was 29 days. That was between 1991 and 2010. And that has since ballooned out to 118 days. Also, we're talking about the American Enterprise Institute. They threw out a rough estimate of $200 million per day, $200 million per day, under the latest continuing resolution that covered the start of fiscal year 2023. That has a total of $18 billion. So I guess what I'm asking is both of yours and Mr. McCord's commitment to get Congress, all of you, to do accurate. I mean, I know you come in here and you preach to high heavens, and we seem to not take it seriously at all. We're talking real dollars now, real dollars. And they think that basically the budget keeps ballooning out of sight, and we have no oversight whatsoever. If we, as Congress, just did our job on time, we're told overall you could save anywhere between 5 to 10% of the request you have. That's $40 to $80 billion a year. Is that an accurate statement?
I think so. I defer to Secretary McCord for exact figures.
We'll let him respond also.
But you're absolutely right, Senator. And you heard me say in my opening statement that the best way that Congress can help us in this year going forward is to try to get an on-time appropriation done. Without that, we can't do new starts, we can't do a number of things, and you can't get that time back. It's gone, and so that puts us further behind in terms of our competition with adversaries like China.
Mr. Secretary McCord.
Yeah, I would concur. Your figures are accurate, Senator. And as the Secretary said, we can't buy back time with money, and that goes on the readiness side if I miss training rotation due to shortage of funds. But it's especially harmful on the contracting side when we've got areas like the Triad where we're trying to move the bomber into low-rate production. That we can't take those next steps under CRs, as you know, and that's the biggest lost opportunity thing comes in moving forward where we're constrained legally.
So basically, we have non-productive money that we are appropriating that's used basically to make up for the inefficiencies of Congress because of our budget process. Without you having to say anything or confirm that, that's what I'm taking away from this little conversation that we've had. And I'm doing everything I can to make sure we do our job on time. You know, by April 1st by law, House and the Senate supposed to have a budget. By April 15th by law, we're supposed to have one reconciled. By September 30th by law, we're supposed to pass. That would change the course of what we're doing, how we're spending right now tremendously, rather than cutting anything, just being efficient. So I would hope that we would all take that seriously. General Milley, as you know, since the beginning of Putin's illegal war in Ukraine, the United States has provided over $76 billion in justified funding to support Ukraine in both the military defense of their people and freedom, but also in humanitarian and infrastructure support. Can you speak to your confidence in the U.S. NATO-Ukrainian weapons accountability and possibly elaborate on the Joint Strategic Oversight Plan that was announced by this year by the Inspector Generals of the DOD, State Department, and USAID. Yeah, they all.
As you know, Senator, we do not have any uniformed troops or civilians, for that matter, accompanying Ukrainian forces in the front line. We do have folks working out of the embassy, so they're working at the Ministry of Defense level, and that's as far as our hands-on accountability goes. We do have some other means through reporting that the Ukrainians report to us, and I'll be happy to talk about that in a classified session, but there are some means and mechanisms of doing some accountability. It is not as rigorous as you might think, but I think the biggest way to measure the accountability is effectiveness on the Russian forces. These anti-tank munitions, this artillery is having devastating effect on the Russians. As you know, publicly, the Russians have well over 200,000 casualties. Their offensive aspirations have come essentially to a halt. Their capabilities have been, their ground forces have been absolutely impaled on this Ukrainian bayonet, so to speak, and that is largely due to the resources that the United States and other countries have provided. So although we don't have by name DODIC sort of accountability, serial number accountability, you can see the accountability on the battlefield.
Yeah, my time's running out. I'd love to ask you about the AUMF. I'm sure you probably talked about the AUMF before I got here, but thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Manchin. Senator Schmidt, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Austin, and by the way, for both of you, thank you for your service to the country. We really do appreciate it. I do. I know I do. The folks back home do. Secretary Austin, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions, sort of along the lines of what Senator Tuberville asked. You mentioned earlier that you didn't want to spend a lot of time, and you thought that it was a drag on our force and spending money on things that don't make us a fighting force. You just mentioned that you don't get the time back. With the stand-down day to address extremism, that cost the military and taxpayers nearly 5.4 million man-hours. And as we talk about recruitment, I think it is completely naive to when we talk about the numbers, to separate the challenges that we have now from the politics, the divisive politics that have been injected now into the military. The military stands as this great meritocracy where people can achieve great things, but by infusing divisive DEI trainings, by infusing abortion politics, by infusing COVID vaccine mandates, it has created division in the ranks, and we have heard from those military members. And I sent you a letter last week, and I want to ask you, we talked about in the letter, referenced the $86.5 million for dedicated diversity and inclusion activities. I want to ask you here today, how many DEI-related positions exist in the Department of Defense?
I can't speak to that specific number. I'll take that question for the record with your permission, Senator.
Sure.
And in terms of that number, it's a small percentage of an $842 billion budget. And I would just further point out with respect to DEI, I think you know, Senator, that Congress requires that we have a DEI program. In the 2020 NDA, it states, the Secretary of Defense shall design and implement a 5-year strategic plan for diversity and inclusion in the Department of Defense.
Yeah, I don't know what these activities are, which is the purpose of the letter. I don't know what materials are being submitted. We looked, so hopefully the response to the letter will be, in fact, be responsive to what actually is being pushed with these so-called trainings. And then I do want to ask you, so there were nearly 17,000, well, there are over 8,000 military men and women who lost their jobs because of the COVID vaccine mandate. Is that correct?
That's about right.
Okay, so we talk about recruitment challenges. Are you actively going after to try to get those 8,000 people back?
They have the ability to
Well, right. No, I'm asking, what are your efforts?
They have the ability to reapply for readmission. Into
Are you
the military.
recruiting these folks? Are
I
you
am not recruiting them, but they have the ability.
So sayonara, 8,000 well-trained folks.
We are recruiting new recruits.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what happens now to the remaining several thousand who didn't get the vaccine? Are you intending to fire them as well? There are several folks that weren't immediately dismissed who refused the vaccine. They're still in the military. Are you planning to fire those folks as well?
The vaccine mandate, Senator, has been rescinded.
So you don't. Now, even though they were refusing when you did have the policy.
That's right. The
So your
mandate-
commitment here today is those folks are not going to lose their jobs.
Not for a vaccine mandate, Senator.
Okay. Well, I would submit that
If I could, I'd like to go back to
Sure.
the 5 million hours that you mentioned, and I'd like to ask the chairman who submitted that number, where that number came from.
We'd be happy to back it up. If you take the stand-down day by the number of folks that didn't work that day, that's where we get the numbers. So we'd be happy to follow up specifically. I do have a question.
That's not accurate, Senator.
Okay. Well, maybe you can answer. How many man-hours were sacrificed that day? You just testified you can't get those hours back. How many hours were sacrificed on the stand-down day?
Let me ask him to tell you where the numbers came from.
Okay. Well, maybe you can get us those numbers when you when you respond to the letter. Also,
It's as simple as this. You know, when asked to provide that number, his approach was there are 2.1 million troops. Each troop spent 2 hours, and that's where the number comes from.
Okay. Well, you can't get the time back, right? Whatever that number was, you can't get that time back.
2 hours for
General Milley, I do want to ask you a question because I'm limited on time. I do want to ask you about the Philippines, which I think you had mentioned in your previous remarks about that strength, that relationship continues to grow, which I personally think is critical in the Indo-Pacific. Can you talk about what some of those efforts, where you think that's headed? I think as we, obviously the allies there talked about the most, Japan, Australia, and India, but I think the Philippines are critical. Could you talk about the strategic value of strengthening that relationship?
I can, Senator, but just point of clarification. It's 2.1 million, 2 hours, we factored 2 hours per person. That's with the 5.4 million. That's out of 2.8 billion man-hours available, factored on a 10-hour workday, 5 days a week for the U.S. military. So
Okay, well, whether we're talking about dollars or hours, millions still matter.
No,
the folks that I represent think a million is a big number.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm just saying where the math came from. And on the Philippines, but more broadly than the Philippines, generally the Western Pacific. It is my view that China is, you heard it in the opening statement, is trying to become the regional hegemon within perhaps 10 or 15 years or so. And part of that, of course, is putting the Philippines and other countries in the region at a disadvantage. Those countries want the United States presence there. They clearly do. There's really an underreported arms race going on in the Western Pacific right now. These countries are arming themselves up, and they very much, with very few exceptions, want the United States there. That's why the Secretary traveled to the Philippines. That's why we're looking at access basing and oversight. That's why we're looking at a reposturing in the Western Pacific. It is a design there to be forward deployed in order to deter armed conflict with a great power being China in this case, and deter Chinese aggression, not only in the Western Pacific, but perhaps elsewhere. So these are all linked together, tied together. There's many other initiatives ongoing by the services and also by other countries as well. But it's really critical, and it's really critical that we get it done right, and we need to move out with a sense of urgency because the next 5 years, I think, are going to be determinative of really what comes in the future with our relationship with China.
Thank you, General.
Senator Peters, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the three of you, thank you for your testimony here today, and thank you for the work you do. I also want to begin by commending the Department's efforts to invest in and incentivize funding to build semiconductor manufacturing facilities and advanced research and development activities at both the national and the regional levels. Undersecretary McCord, could you speak to how the fiscal year 24 DoD budget request takes advantage of the CHIPS Act that Congress passed recently, that funding, and makes the necessary investments to ensure that we have both a resilient and a robust domestic microelectronics manufacturing ecosystem for both state-of-the-art as well as legacy chips?
Thank you, Senator. First, I just want to say that the department really appreciates congressional leadership on the CHIPS Act. It really speaks to the recognition of the whole of government approach needed with China. CHIPS is separate from our budget in the sense that it's now a standalone authorization. We had, prior to that, in the 22 and 23 budgets, started a pretty robust microelectronics effort under Secretary Austin that was really tied to the defense-specific capabilities like radiation hardening. What we're doing with CHIPS on top of that then is really that broader industrial base, the fabrication, labs to fabs. I understand that is now, we're now in our request for solutions source selection for the proposals that went out in that first year of CHIPS that Congress created last year. So we're moving out now on source selection to actually build out that capability. And then that, again, that sits on top of the more defense-specific microelectronics, which is over $2 billion in our budget.
Thank you. Secretary Austin, the development of Taiwan's reserve military capacity is without question a key component of ensuring that their military is well prepared to deter and, if needed, defeat a potential PRC invasion of the island. However, I remain concerned that the department is not sufficiently addressing the hardships that exist at the authority and funding level with increased mill-to-mill and civ-mill interactions between the United States and Taiwan. Current policy restricts the level of interaction that U.S. forces, particularly the National Guard, have with Taiwan, both CONUS and OCONUS. And additionally, current restrictions do not allow the Guard to consistently engage with Taiwan under the same authority that the State Partnership Program utilizes. Rather, other authorities must be utilized to justify and to fund National Guard's involvement in this strategic relationship. Essentially, what it's happening, it's creating this maze of funding and authorities that restricts consistent engagement that's so important. And it creates undue processes and procedures to coordinate and fund cooperation. So my question for you, sir, is how is the department reassessing the relevant authorities and lines of funding to help streamline the National Guard's ability to support security cooperation efforts with Taiwan?
Yeah, we're taking a hard, thanks, Senator. We're taking a hard look at, all the things that we can do to increase the capability in their reserve forces. You're right, Senator. This is critical for them going forward. Our Guard has done amazing work with other countries across the globe. Most recent example, as you know, is the work that they did in Ukraine prior to this invasion. And so that kind of engagement we think is critical. So we're going to continue to find ways to make sure that we're helping as much as we can in accordance with the Taiwan Relations Act. And so we'll relook all of our policies and authorities to make sure that we can streamline this as best possible. In the meantime, we're going to continue to do what we're doing to increase our capability.
Secretary Austin, on Saturday, Russia accused Azerbaijan of violating the ceasefire, which ended the 2020 war with Armenia. This comes as Azerbaijan has blockaded the Lanchin corridor for more than 3 months, leading to what is a humanitarian crisis in Karabakh. I recently wrote to you and Secretary Blinken regarding the use of Section 907 waiver authority and the potential effects of U.S. support in that conflict. My question for you is: is U.S. military aid supporting the Azerbaijan military and enabling their aggression against Armenia?
We are clearly not enabling aggression, Senator. And as you know, we have had a relationship with them, and we have provided assistance in some cases, but in all cases, in-use monitoring is really important, and we've been focused on that. So we've taken a responsible approach to this. And again, we do not support, will not support aggressive activity. So,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Senator Peterson and Mullen, please.
Thank you. Sorry, my mic almost came up there. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you all for being here. General Milley, I want to thank you again for the phone call and the conversation we had yesterday. I greatly appreciate your time on that. As we stated in that conversation, I wanted to have something for the record, and so before I begin with the rest of my questions, I'd like to touch base on the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan with American troops. Will you commit to providing a complete after-action report on the withdrawal to Congress that provides accountability and transparency for the American people, for the closure of lives that were lost and the people left behind?
Absolutely, and the Secretary of Defense has directed that we do that, and that is done by the Joint Staff and CENTCOM as well, but also the Department of Defense is doing that. So I absolutely commit to that.
Thank you. Generally, as you know, the industrial base is going through some changes right now. And prior to the Russian invasion of the Ukraine sites, invasion of Ukraine, sites like McAllister's Army Ammunition Plant were planning on seeing a decrease in productivity. And since this invasion, there's obviously been a new emphasis on where we're moving. And can you speak to what we're seeing with plants like McAllister and the ammunition depots, what the plan is and the future looks like for the industrial era?
Yeah, thanks, Senator. The Defense Industrial Base, Secretary's had several different sessions to include the DepSecDef and others within the department to really go over the Defense Industrial Base in some detail. One of the big lessons coming out of Ukraine is the incredible consumption of conventional munitions in the conduct of what is really a limited regional war. So a great power war, if that were to ever happen, God forbid it does, the consumption rates would be incredible. So the Secretary tasked us to go back and review all of the various operational plans and the COCOMs to determine if our estimates are correct, because it's those estimates then feed into these budgets to buy the ammunition. That study is ongoing. We can tell you that, for example, 155 ammunition, which is in high demand in the Ukraine fight, we report out daily in a written report to the Secretary of Defense on all the various ammunition statuses that we have. I won't go over that in an open session, but in a closed session we can do that if you'd like. The bottom line is the Defense Industrial Base is critical to the defense of the United States, and our ability to produce and manufacture and produce the logistical capability, especially munitions, is fundamental. You mentioned McAllister. I had an opportunity to visit McAllister. That's an incredible facility with incredibly skilled workers that are highly motivated, and it is really a one-of type facility. It's an amazing place. Places like that exist elsewhere in the United States as well, and we need to pay great attention to that Defense Industrial Base if we're ever going to successfully compete and hopefully not actually have a war with a great power.
What's interesting is the relationship between the public and private service there at a lot of our industrial areas around the country, especially in McAllister, where we have the public sector working with the private sector and delivering missions on time. And so I think there's a great amount of pride there that I think the communities that have the ability and actually the desire to help are standing ready. And McAllister is no different.
That's great. The workers there are off the charts incredible. Skilled workers, highly motivated.
Focus on Fort Sill just a second. General Rainey had stated recently that the Army Futures Command will be reviewing their use of cross-functional teams. Fort Sill in Lawton, Oklahoma, is currently home to 2 cross-functional teams. As the original architect of this system, while serving as Army Chief of Staff, can you speak to the usefulness of the future of these programs, sir?
Yeah, the Army Futures Command and the priorities that the Army laid out for modernization 6-7 years ago are still what they're working on. They've had the most successful modernization programs they've had in decades as a result of that Futures Command. Key to that was the cross-functional teams led by general officers in each case. Those cross-functional teams were designed intentionally to be temporary until those programs are brought online. For example, long-range precision fires, future vertical lift, the next generation combat vehicle. Those are programs that once they get brought online and brought into the force, those cross-functional teams will go away. But it's been a highly successful and innovative organizational concept. What General Rainey's talking about now is the next step, getting it to the next level, because those programs are well underway. So he's not talking about getting rid of those CFTs. He's talking about looking at the next set of CFTs. For example, all-domain sensing would be one. There's several of these others that they're looking at. They're not made any decisions yet. The Army hasn't, but Secretary of the Army will make those decisions in due time. But it's an excellent program. It's an excellent command, and they're really moving out very, very well in the modernization of the U.S. Army.
Thank you for clarifying that. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Senator Mullen. Senator King is recognized and will take over as I go vote. And the vote is on for those who have not yet voted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Austin, I just want to clarify a couple of things about vaccines and vaccine mandates. I'm told that a routine mustering into the service requires something like 13 vaccinations. Is that accurate?
I think it's 9, Senator. And depending on where you're going, at any one point in time, that number can increase up to about 13. So.
Depends on where the soldier, sailor, Marine, or Guardian will be assigned.
Right.
And that's just routine. That's part of military for as long as we can remember. Is it true, General, that Mr. Secretary, that General Washington mandated vaccination against smallpox in the Continental Army at the time of the Revolutionary War?
That is true.
And the purpose of this vaccination mandate had nothing to do with politics. It had to do with saving lives and maintaining readiness, did it not?
That's exactly right.
And I remember being on a call when we were in sort of lockdown here with regard to the USS Teddy Roosevelt, where in early March, April, and May of 2020, the virus ripped through the ship. I think it's over 1,000 people tested positive because of the nature of their close military proximity. Doesn't that make vaccinating against an infectious disease all the more important in the military?
To me and to all of my colleagues, it absolutely does, Senator. I've told the chairman a number of times that in my lifetime, the only thing that I've seen that has been able to disable a carrier is this vaccine.
It's interesting because General Washington said that when his letter to John Hancock about the vaccine, he said, this is the most dangerous thing to our troops, more dangerous than the sword of the enemy. Exactly what you just said. General Milley, I want to thank you for the integrity that you've demonstrated in your position. I remember, and I'm sure you do too, questioning you at your confirmation hearing. And my question was, will you tell the truth? Will you give your best military advice, even if it doesn't suit the leadership that you were working with at the time? You have done that, and I want to thank you for that and for the extraordinary service that you've provided to this country throughout your career, but over the last 4 years. I appreciate your keeping your word to me and this committee from the date of your confirmation. General Austin, allowing the intelligence about the imminence of the Russian invasion was, I think, a brilliant move by the administration at the beginning. However, why are we telling everybody in the world what we're sending and when we're sending it? This morning, I learned on National Public Radio, and I suspect Putin did, although I don't know if he listens to National Public Radio, how many tanks have arrived in Ukraine and when they are going to be deployed. Why do we broadcast that information?
Well, we certainly try not to, Senator. As you know, as various countries provide contributions, they are proud of those contributions, and sometimes we find our colleagues providing a bit too much information. But yeah,
you understand my question.
I do. So, and when I meet with our colleagues here, and I meet with them every month, this is a point that I'll continue to drive home, that the Russians are absolutely focused on where this equipment is and what it's doing. So we gotta help ourselves.
I fully agree.
a couple of questions I'm going to submit for the record about ISR capability, both in Northcom and Southcom, which was in their unfunded priority list. But you can make a strong case it should have been in the base budget. ISR is so important, particularly in counter-drug, where people are being killed every day. I think my calculation is about 20 people have died in this country of overdoses since this hearing started this morning. And to not have sufficient ISR and resources to interdict what we can find, I think is a misallocation of resources. I'm going to submit that for the record. Finally, General Milley, probably the word that's been used the most today is readiness. And the question I have is, are we preparing for the right war? In terms of the changed nature of war that you've seen over the course of your career. If a conflict comes, it's going to start with cyber, electronic, directed energy, space. Are we adequately taking account of the changed nature of conflict so that we're not preparing for the last war, but for hopefully there won't be another one, but if there is another conflict, that's where our efforts should be going?
Yeah, just really briefly, Senator, I think we're in a pivotal period here, a transition period, where we have a method of war that is based out of an industrial age sort of thing, and we're moving to a different operational environment sometime in the future. So think about things like robotics, artificial intelligence, hypersonics, cyber. There's a wide variety of technologies that are coming at us very, very quickly. And the country that maximizes and optimizes those technologies for the conduct of warfighting is going to have a decisive advantage, at least at the outset of the next war. Now, at the same time, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater here. We're in a transition period, so we're still going to need ships and planes and tanks, et cetera. But we are in that transition period, and I think this budget and the last one and future budgets are going to have to move us in the direction of modernizing the force, transforming this force into a future operating environment that is probably not very far away, probably about 10-ish years or so, and we need to move out with a sense of urgency.
Thank you. I agree, and the R&D emphasis in the last budget and this budget, I think, is one of the most important policy directions that this budget represents. On behalf of the chairman, Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses, General Milley in particular, for your service, and General Austin as well. I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary, I appreciate you highlighting the suicide issue in your opening statement. As you know, that's hitting the forces in Alaska particularly hard. Still having a hard time getting our arms around that. It's still happening, so working together on that one is a high priority of mine, and I appreciate you putting a lot of attention to that. I first want to begin by quickly covering an oversight issue deeply concerning to members of this committee, which was an abuse of the President's Commander-in-Chief authority when he gave a campaign speech last fall with active duty Marines as political props. This wasn't a speech about Veterans Day or Memorial Day or a speech about the heroic actions of the Marines at Iwo Jima or the Chosin Reservoir. It was the most partisan political speech of the President's 2 years in office, where he disparaged tens of millions of Americans that he claimed threatened the Republic, did not respect the Constitution, on and on and on. Really harsh partisan campaign speech. And there flanking the President of the United States were 2 active duty Marines. Shameful, outrageous, infuriating. I've raised this issue with both of you and other military leaders on how inappropriate this image was to our republic. General Milley, you've talked about how the military needs to stay out of politics. I am assuming good faith on both of your parts that you didn't know this. But what I want is a commitment from both of you the next time some White House staffer thinks it's a good idea to politicize the military with a political speech like this with 2 active duty Marines or anyone else standing by the President, that both of you will put your foot down and not only say no, but say hell no. Can I get your commitment on doing that to this committee?
Senator, I think you know that I'm opposed to any type of politicization of the military.
Yep.
And I will not comment on my president's actions.
You think that was appropriate, Mr. Secretary?
Again, Senator, I
Do
don't
you think that was, in your personal opinion, General Milley? You've been speaking about this. Look, I thought both of you guys are going to go no and no. I got a bunch more questions. But if we're debating this, let's have the debate. You think that was appropriate, General Milley? You've spoken about not politicizing the military. That's just outrageous. And by the way, Democrats and Republicans agree with me. So this isn't even that controversial. The President made a mistake, politicized. Go read the speech. What do you think, General Milley?
I'm firmly committed to a nonpartisan, non-political military.
Okay, so if the White House has an idea to do something like that, again, will both of you commit to this committee to tell whoever the staffer is, hey, don't do that. Bad idea. Marines shouldn't be used as
I'll just
political
speak
props.
for myself. I've been asked in the past in 2 different administrations on things just like that, and I've always said keep the military out of politics.
I'm surprised we're having a debate on this. Unfortunately, I'm burning a lot of time. It's an important issue, though. I think we all would agree. I'm going to next turn to Senator Wicker's point on the budget. Budgets are a reflection of an administration's priorities. This administration has now 3 different times in a row submitted inflation-adjusted cuts to the Department of Defense, while many other federal agencies have gotten double-digit increases. This was the 2022 budget. You see the DOD was second last, with a 3% cut. The 2023 budget, same kind of issue. We're down there last. That was actually a 4% cut. In this budget, once again, one of the down here with 3% cut, while other agencies, EPA, almost 20%. Both of you have said this is the most dangerous time since World War II. This current budget shrinks the Army, shrinks the Navy, shrinks the Marine Corps. Doesn't that embolden our allies like Xi Jinping and Putin, not deter them? And General Milley, in your personal opinion, do you support a budget that actually shrinks 3 of the 4 services, particularly the Navy? The Congress here has been very clear that we want to grow the Navy. The Chinese are looking at our naval fleet, and we're shrinking it. That's the budget. The President probably assumes correctly that this committee will bump it up significantly. But do both of you support a budget that shrinks 3 of the 4 services? And what would you say to the issue of emboldening our allies when they see budgets like this that we, 3 years in a row, have to rectify by adding significant funding to them? I'll ask both of you, gentlemen.
Well, Senator, first of all, let me thank you for your continued support for DOD. We really appreciate what you and your colleagues have done over the years. I think you heard me say earlier that we went through great pains to link our budget request to our strategy. We're going after the capabilities that we think we need to be successful in any endeavor. And so I am satisfied that this budget gives us what we need. It's an $842 billion budget. And again, I think it allows us to go after the right capabilities.
General.
And Senator, as I said in my opening statement, I think the uniformed military can defend this country with an $842 billion budget. That is a lot of money. And I think if we put it in the right place against the right priorities, we'll be able to adequately defend this country.
In your personal opinion, do you agree with shrinking the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps?
The size of the forces, I'll go one by one here. When I was Chief of Staff of the Army, I had advocated for about a 520, 550 size ground force.
This budget takes it to 450.
Right. And so I advocated for that because my analysis of future combat indicated that. This strategy, though, this is a strategy-informed budget. This strategy, and starting under General Mattis or Secretary Mattis and now Secretary Austin, this strategy takes us to essentially a one-war strategy. A one-war strategy with the main effort being China. So the question is, what forces are going to be required to confront or potentially fight China? I think the Army and Marines definitely have a role to play.
So does the Navy.
The weight of the effort is going to be the Navy
and we're shrinking
the Air Force, the Navy and the Air Force.
Budget shrinks the Navy.
It does by a couple of ships for a temporary period of time. I talked to the CNO last night at length about this to make sure that I was clear on the Navy piece of this. The ships that are being decommissioned and divested of are having significant maintenance problems. In fact, the ships for the amphibs, they've been in the yard for years. They're costing way more money just at repair than they're worthwhile. So they're trying to shift to the next generation of amphib. You'll see the curve, I think, when they submit their shipbuilding plan, you'll see the curve going up in the not-too-distant future. So there is a temporary downward spiral of a couple of ships in the overall shipbuilding program, but this budget buys 9. You're down 2. The net effect is you're down 2 ships out of a 296 ship Navy, and then it goes down to 293, and then it starts coming back up. Now, is that huge? I think the capability of those ships matters, as we all know. The capability of our ships are different than the capability of the Chinese ships. I know that the Chinese have a lot of ships. However, we not only have the United States Navy, we have the United States Navy working with the Japanese Navy, working with the Australian Navy, working with the British Navy, working with the French Navy. If you start adding up these navies, China is not only outnumbered, but they're outgunned, and in terms of capabilities. If you look at just what I think is the most lethal capability in the United States Navy today is the submarine. And our subs, the Chinese Navy or the Russian Navy, are not even in the same ballpark as our submarine force. Our submarine force can bring people to their knees just by themselves. So our Navy, in this budget, we never have enough things that we always want something else. But this budget adequately protects the American people. I can't compare it against the rest of the president's priorities, but this $842 billion budget buys a lot of kit, a lot of training, and we are focused on 2 things, lethality and readiness. Lethality and readiness. That's all we do every day. 24,000 live fires last year. 24,000 of those. You talked about a continuing, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Sorry, Senator.
Well, no, I thought it was a good answer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Secretary General. Appreciate your service again. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Senator Duckworth, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, earlier this month, a former soldier was sentenced to 45 years in prison for attempting to murder U.S. service members, for attempting to provide material support to terrorists, and illegally transmitting national defense information. In fact, Mr. Messler, the convicted gentleman, provided sensitive details about his unit, including information about its location, movements, and security, to members of the extremist organization Order of the Nine Angles, a white supremacist, neo-Nazi, and pro-jihadist group. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a RAND report dated 2021 that is entitled Reducing the Risk of Extremist Activity in the United States Military.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This report states, and I'll just briefly say this, the vast majority of military personnel and their families are not extremists, but even a small number of people engaged in extremist activities could damage the United States military's reputation, its force, its members, and the larger community. Extremist activities can also be harmful to the individuals who are radicalized and their friends and family. That said, as someone who wore the uniform for 23 years. I mean, I was just a reservist and a guardsman. Did not reach the ranks of the gentleman here or even some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. I have to say, I am offended at the implication that conducting extremist training means that our military is filled with extremists, just as I personally am appreciative of the fact that we have sharp training, and by conducting sharp training, we're not saying that every member of the military is a harasser or a perpetrator of military sexual assault. Similarly, my entire time since I've left the military has been spent working on mental health for our troops. And by providing mental health training and resiliency training, we are not saying that the military is filled with people who are about to commit suicide. This is simply part of readiness. That said, I'm going to switch. I just want to put this in record because it's very offensive to me to very politically say that extremism in the military and training against it is saying that the military is full of extremists. The military is full of the bravest, most amazing men and women who do the best job that they can, and they need to be equipped to do their jobs, and that means that they need to be equipped with the training to recognize sexual harassment when it occurs, to recognize extremism when it occurs, to recognize signs of hidden wounds of war when it occurs, so that we can keep our units in the highest levels of readiness. Okay, I'm done with that. Last month, I led a cordial to Japan and Indonesia, and I'm planning to going back to the region twice more in just the next few months. And in June, Senator Sullivan and I will be leading a delegation to the Shangri-La Dialogue. And Mr. Secretary, I believe you're going to be speaking there, and I look forward to hearing your remarks there. And in August, I'm planning to take a bipartisan group of my colleagues to visit the Philippines, Indonesia, and Thailand to spotlight the importance of opportunities that our nations have to partner together. Mr. Secretary, in your testimony, you highlighted the DoD's enhanced maritime security with the Philippines and exercises with Thailand. In what other ways does the department's budget request support our allies and partners in Southeast Asia, and how are you programmed to achieve integrated deterrence in this area of the Indo-Pacific?
Well, thanks, Senator, and certainly, with the PDI, Pacific Deterrence Initiative, we're asking you for some $9.1 billion to improve infrastructure in the region so that we can position our troops further forward and we can be more interoperable. Presence matters. We see a significant investment in the AUKUS agreement. Australia and the UK and the US are working together to provide the Australians a conventionally armed, nuclear-powered submarine capability. And another pillar of AUKUS calls for us to work together on key technologies like AI and hypersonics and long-range fires. And so I think that kind of thing, building interoperability, is really, really key. We're doing some of the same things with the Japanese as we work to become more interoperable with them. We're helping our partners and allies strengthen their capabilities in terms of cyber, and I think all of those things will add value. But we're seeing things in the region now that we weren't seeing 2 years ago. The Japanese doubling its defense investment, more access to the Philippines. As you know, 2 years ago we were about to get kicked out of the Philippines, but we've moved to strengthen our relationship, and I just think that's powerful. So,
thank you. I just want to touch on the cyber piece. In fact, last year I included, in 2021 NDAA, I included legislation that authorized the Department of Defense to establish a pilot program to enhance cybersecurity, the resilience and the readiness of the military forces of Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia. General Milley, next month I will introduce legislation to expand this important program to include Malaysia and the Philippines. Can you comment on the value of direct engagement with our overseas partners to help build their cyber skills?
I can, not only cyber skills, but any of the military skills. We have excellent military-to-military relations with so many countries. If you look at, for example, the contact group in Europe that the Secretary has organized, 54 countries show up for that to support Ukraine. And obviously there's only 30 in NATO, so many countries from around the world. In Asia, it's particularly important, I think, given the dynamic nature of the geostrategic environment in Asia. So the more countries, excuse me, the more countries that we have with us, whether it's cyber or anything else, is critically important. In the world of cyber, though, we know that cyber and space are two domains now of armed conflict, including the traditional ones of land, sea, and air. So as we modernize the force and move into cyber and space, those two domains are going to be fundamental to success in any kind of conflict. So working with our allies and partners in the region and developing their capabilities along with ours, I think will go a long way to deterrence, and if necessary, if deterrence fails and it's necessary, then it'll go a long way to prevailing in the armed conflict.
Thank you, and thank you for your remarkable career of service to this nation and also that of your wife. She not only directly saved lives herself in a very hands-on way, quite literally, but also her work on mental health for our troops is continuing to pay off dividends. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. Senator Budd, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you all for being here today and for your time. It's been very helpful. This week, the Senate will likely vote to repeal the 1991 and the 2002 authorizations of use of military force against Iraq. Now, one of the amendments considered was whether to replace the 2002 AUMF with an authorization for the use of force against Iranian-backed militias in Iraq. Now, that vote failed, but I think there is an important issue here that needs to be addressed. Now, despite the likely repeal of the 2002 AUMF, the The U.S. still has forces in Iraq at the invitation of the Iraqi government to train, advise, and to assist Iraqi forces. We also have forces in Syria conducting operations against ISIS. Now, given Iran's continuing malign activities in the region, our forces are at risk of attack from Iranian-backed militias, and in fact have been attacked by those militias more than 80 times, including just last week, resulting in the death of a U.S. contractor and injuries to U.S. service members. So Secretary Austin and General Milley, a brief yes or no, please. Do you agree that the President has both the authority and the responsibility under Article 2 of the Constitution to protect the United States and our forces from attack and the threat of imminent attack? Again, yes or no. Secretary Austin.
I do, Senator.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, thank you. But despite the more than 80 attacks by Iranian-backed militias, the United States has only responded with force just a handful of times. In my view, that's unacceptable. Secretary Austin, earlier you told my colleague Senator Cotton that our last retaliatory strikes against IRGC infrastructure, it was against infrastructure. Now, does that mean a building or a warehouse? The question behind the question is really, why not target the IRGC leadership or officers directing these attacks?
Thank you, Senator. We can be more specific in closed session, but it included a headquarters element building and also storage sites where key munitions were being stored and other capabilities were being developed, and there were people in those facilities.
Thank you for that. The point being that we need to reassert deterrence, and our current responses don't seem to effectively do that. Weakness only breeds more aggression. Weakness is provocative. And if we only respond when they kill an American, they'll continue attacking, hoping to injure as many as possible. There's no reason why this administration should not respond more forcefully should Iranian-backed militias threaten U.S. forces in Iraq or in Syria. It's important for the American people to know that it's not because the administration doesn't have the legal authority to do so. This administration simply seems to lack the will. So, Secretary Austin, another issue that needs to be addressed is the Department's use of taxpayer dollars to facilitate abortions. Now, I join my colleagues in publicly denouncing the policy changes, unfortunately made at your direction, to authorize uncharged absences and travel pay for those seeking abortions. So the military is not a place for social agendas. So I'll ask you here, will you rescind those abhorrent policies?
What I will say, Senator, is number one, this policy does not fund abortions. And I want to be clear on that. This policy provides access to non-covered reproductive health care. And as I said earlier, you know, almost 1 in 5 of our troops are women.
Very aware, but I understand that ultimately it's taxpayer dollars that are for this uncharged absences and the travel expenses related to that. I understand your point, but I just still think that's not the right answer. And until these policies are rescinded, I'm going to also have to consider holds against DOD nominees in solidarity with my colleagues. Mr. Secretary, you can fix this. The 158 holds, in essence, that are there. You could fix this in nearly an instant. So I would encourage that. Shifting gears a bit,
Sir, I would encourage you to help us make sure that we have the leadership in place to lead our magnificent force.
And I would agree with you. I completely agree with you. And you can fix that nearly instantaneously with a change in policy. So thank you. We understand, Secretary Austin, that the committee has heard from most of the combatant commanders so far earlier this year, and I've asked each of them about foreign military sales and how that's working in their areas of responsibility. And each have said that the process is not fast or flexible enough to meet our partners' defense requirements, and that we're at risk of losing our security of partner of choice status to China. So what efforts are the department taking internally to streamline the FMS process, and are there issues that you think need to be addressed by Congress?
A year ago, I put together a Tiger team to address this specific issue, and And you're right. I mean, there are a number of our allies and partners who clearly want to see capability be provided quicker. And I fully understand their concerns. So we're doing everything we can to identify log jams and work through those to speed up things. Industry's coming out of a 2-year trough there with because of COVID, as you know, sir, and you know, it'll take a little time for industry to catch up, but we're going to do everything we can to make sure that, you know, the bureaucracy is not slowing things down, and we'll continue this work. But I don't disagree with you that this is something that that requires consistent focus on, and we're going to do that.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you both. I yield.
Thank you. Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Austin, earlier today at this hearing, Senator Ernst asked General Milley about conflict in the Indo-PACOM region, and the General's response referenced the importance of irregular warfare. So, Secretary Austin, I've been rather disappointed with the halting and repetitive process that DoD has exhibited as it attempts to establish the Irregular Warfare Center. As you may recall, the IW Center was authorized by this committee back in 2020, and the project was intended to honor Arizona Senator and former Armed Services Committee Chairman John McCain's legacy of support for the concept of a whole society approach to our national security. He knew that traditional military strength isn't enough in today's geopolitics, and that we also need to succeed in the irregular and in the competition spaces, not just in conflict. In recognition of the original intent for this project, this committee supported naming the center for Senator John McCain. Now, I've also been working closely with this committee and the department to ensure that we leverage expertise and ideas from universities to help our nation get after these significant challenges. And the original authority identified the McCain Institute at Arizona State University as a site to be reviewed as a location for the establishment of the center. And I appreciate your memo, Mr. Secretary, from July of 2022, affirming your decision to create the Center for Security Studies in Irregular Warfare and directing DoD to act expeditiously, including in determining a location. But now we're nearly 3 years down the road, and we've had numerous duplicative site reviews, and we're still waiting for a final decision. And what I don't think we need is a new basing process. We need a decision. And it's clear to me that it's time to move forward with Arizona State University and ensure that the IW Center can deliver on its promise for DoD and the nation. So, Mr. Secretary, can I have your commitment that you will look into these delays and push the department to come to a final decision on this?
Certainly, Senator, you have my commitment that I'll look into the delays. You know, what I've required the team to do is to make sure that we have a process that's transparent and also that avoids outside influence, and to make sure that we're above board. But I'll certainly look into it and get a brief back to you on specific delays that we've encountered.
Well, thank you, General. Because 3 years is just—it's too long, and this is, as General Milley pointed out, is just important if we wind up in a conflict in the Western Pacific. So, thank you, Mr. Secretary. General Milley, last year Congress authorized multi-year procurement contracts as a way to boost our nation's dwindling supply of munitions and to purchase additional systems in support of Ukraine. And this has had a meaningful impact on a lot of Arizona businesses who produce some of these critical munitions. Multi-year procurement can save the government a lot of money. It can save it a lot of money over the long run and provide much-needed stability for manufacturing business, while also ensuring that our military and our key partners and allies have the munitions that they need. General Milley, can you please, in the time I have remaining, just talk about the impact that multi-year procurement has had so far in securing weapons, both for the United States but also for Ukraine? Has this been beneficial? And do you think that the munitions that Congress authorized for multi-year procurement is enough, or should we have more products being considered for multi-years?
You have 19 seconds.
So first, multi-year contracts are essential, and passing a budget on time with no continuing resolution is essential to ensure we have multi-year contracts. So those two things are linked, and I cannot emphasize that enough. That's important, and it has had a big impact, positive impact on Ukraine, and it'll help to replenish our stocks as well. So yes.
Do you think we should expand it to some other products?
I do.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Senator
Chairman.
Kelly. I would ask, I've been very tolerant of the time, but I ask people to say with 5 minutes, we're running quite late. Senator Scott, please. Thank you, Senator
Only
Kelly.
for Senator Rosen and me? Only for us two? Thank you. Thank you guys for your service. Thank you for all the men and women that serve. On the Personnel Subcommittee for Armed Services, Senator Warren and I had a presentation on how bad we're doing on recruiting. And our recruiting numbers are pretty pathetic right now. It seems like, I remember I joined in 18, joined the Navy. We knew who our enemies were. We knew what the military's role was. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of Americans are a little concerned. We got some polling data from the Reagan Institute and the National Independent Panel on Military Service and Readiness showing us that many Americans and a majority of active duty service members find the military to be politicized and focused on what divides us instead of what unites us. So if that's true, what can you do, and what are you doing to make sure? Because I think when Senator Sullivan was bringing up the fact that we shouldn't have Marines in pictures like that and with speeches, what are you doing to make sure our military is not perceived to be a political arm of whoever the president is? Doesn't matter whether they're Republican or Democrat.
Well, first of all, I would just two things. First, in terms of the satisfaction of the troops that are in the ranks and how we view ourselves, Senator, I would just point to the fact that we have the highest reenlistment rates probably that we've seen in several decades. And what that means is that people are satisfied they're with the opportunities they're provided and with the development they're receiving. The second thing is with respect to recruiting. As you know, there are a number of things that have combined to create headwinds, and they include the lowest jobless rate that we've seen in many, many years. Also, 2 years of COVID. And you know, Senator, without recruiters not having access to high schools and centers of influence for 2 years will have a profound impact on our ability to recruit. Our leadership in the services is doing the right thing. I mean, our secretaries, our chiefs are doing the right things. They're investing, beginning to invest the right monies in advertising and encouraging their recruiters to be in the right spaces. They're hiring the right people to be recruiters. Now, I used to be a recruiter, so I'm not guessing at what this takes. I know how hard this is and what you need to do to be successful. They're beginning to do those things again, and I think we'll see the trends move in a different direction.
So next year we'll have good numbers?
Next year you'll have better numbers. We'll be where we want to be probably the year after that. It took 2 years to get us to where we are because of COVID. It'll take a little bit longer to get turned around. So.
Senator, I've had many tanks and conversations with all the chiefs on this whole topic. Yes, we have a recruiting challenge, no question about it. I do think there is a cause and effect linked to COVID. I'm not blaming that, but we do know that recruiting numbers are directly linked to contact time. And because kids haven't been in high schools and we haven't had the recruiters in the high schools, contact time is very, very low. So consequently, you have much lower recruiting numbers. That's one key factor. Another key factor is just the familiarity with the American citizenry with their military. Now, we're at an all-time high, 50-year high of reenlistment, which is incredible, actually. That indicates that the people in the military are satisfied with what they're doing every day. So that's an all-time 50-year high. But 80%, about 70 to 80% in that range, depending on the service, of our folks in uniform are in uniform who have a family member in uniform, either a father, mother, brother, sister, aunt, uncle, grandfather, grandmother, something along those lines. So it's familiarity with the military that makes the difference, I think, in terms of recruiting. And that's where we got to get out. We have to get out more into the society. We got to make sure we increase our contact time significantly. And on the politicization piece, look, I have tried from day one to make sure that we have an apolitical, nonpartisan U.S. military. If we have anything other than that, that is a danger to the republic. We must remain a nonpartisan, apolitical military. That's fundamental to this country. That's what I'm committed to. That's what all the generals are committed to, and that's what you have right now, and that's what we want to continue to keep.
Joe Milley, I liked your answer to Senator Sullivan on being able to compete against China. Do you actually believe that all the countries you named will show up if China invades Taiwan?
I think in different ways, yes. Perhaps not all with combat forces and that sort of thing. I think allies operate differently. Every country operates in its own strategic interest at the moment in time. But I do know that we have an incredible network of allies and friends around the world. And in the Pacific, we have a series of bilateral defense treaties that are ratified by the Senate. And those are ironclad, with the Republic of Korea, Japan, Philippines, Thailand, Australia. These are treaties that, we are committed to fight on their behalf, sort of thing. So I think we have a network of allies and partners that gives us a strategic advantage over China or Russia, for that matter. If you look at who China's friends are, it's not very many. They're operating in a purely transactional way around the world. They're trying to garner as many natural resources as they can from around the world. But there's not a lot of people who are, quote-unquote, friends with China. There are many, many countries that are very tight, very close with the United States, and that's a great strength of ours, and I do think they would be there in time of need.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Thank you very much. Senator Rosen, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate holding this hearing. I want to thank each of the witnesses today for testifying for your service to the country. And General Milley, I know this is going to be your last time before the committee, and I want to thank you for your decades of distinguished service, leading the brave men and women of our armed forces, and really navigating so many challenges worldwide. We all appreciate your service. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about combating Iranian aggression, because attacks on the U.S. installations and service members by Iran's terrorist proxies are increasing, particularly by rocket and drone attack. The Pentagon estimates that hundreds of American troops have been killed by Iranian-backed militias, including, as we've discussed already today, a deadly attack last week on a U.S. base in Syria. There are families across the country. They're without their loved ones as a direct result of Iranian aggression. I can't repeat that enough, a direct result of Iranian aggression. Yet Iran's regime has never been held accountable for orchestrating attacks against Americans. So, Secretary Austin, I appreciate that in this latest instance last week, the U.S. responded with airstrikes against individuals connected with the IRGC, but just as you told my colleagues, Senator Cott and Senator Budd, we know there have been about 83 such attacks by Iranian proxies on U.S. forces in Syria in the past 2 years alone. We've only retaliated 4 times. And so why has the United States responded so infrequently, particularly when these militias are the most pervasive threat to U.S. and coalition forces in the region?
Well, first of all, as was stated earlier, our troops have the ability to certainly protect themselves, and there have been responses, local responses to certain types of activity, and our troops always have the ability to do that. In terms of major responses, strikes, you're right. There's only been 4 of those. At the 3 tours I spent in Iraq, I can tell you that me and my troops received a lot of attacks from Iranians. But when we respond, we want to make sure that Iranian-backed militias, we want to make sure that we are going after the element that's responsible for whatever that activity is. So it takes a little time to develop, attribution, And then we want to make sure that we are holding the right element accountable, and we're doing everything that we can to protect our troops. So that all of those things go into our consideration when we plan our response option.
Well, I have two questions, one for you, General Milley, another one for you, Secretary Austin. So the first one's for General Milley to follow up. What can we do proactively to counter these militias before they injure and kill American service members? And then, Secretary Austin, can you tell us, do our commanders, who I know want to do more, have the necessary authorities to target Iran's proxies other than the ability for self-defense? So, General Milley, we'll start with you.
In terms of proactive measures, what we're looking at is force protection and all of the various camps and outposts in the Central Command area of operations, specifically in Iraq and Syria, where these attacks occur. They have, we think, adequate force protection in terms of counter-rocket and missile defenses. They are able to, in fact, 4 responses is probably an understatement, because we end up shooting down a lot of these incoming UAVs, for example. If a rocket or a 107 rocket or something like that is going to miss the compound by 2, 3, 4, 5 kilometers, that's a significant amount. So really what we owe you are some better numbers, actually, on attacks that I would categorize as actual attacks on the compound. And missing a compound by 2 or 3 kilometers, that may or may not. We don't know what that was necessarily. So we owe you some better numbers. But to get to your point about proactively, we have to work closely with the Iraqi government for those Shia militia groups that are inside Iraq. And we have to continue to work with our partners in the region for the attacks that are occurring in Syria. So working with our indigenous allies and partners is key. And then also putting these groups on notice. The various Shia militia groups, we know who they are, letting them know that we will respond affirmatively and forcefully if they attack our troops. We've done that. There are some of these groups that are much more aggressive than others, and we have actually in the past done some things to those groups that are not necessarily on the front page of the paper. So there are activities that are occurring that do act as a proactive measure. And the last thing I would say with respect to Iran, messaging Iran is critically important. The Iranian government is a complex, large organization, and the supreme leader may or may not be making every single decision. We do know that the Iraqi or the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Force, and specifically their Quds Force, which is designated a terrorist organization, that group there is what we need to be targeting, and targeting them very hardly or harshly over time, and that's exactly what we plan on doing.
Thank you. I know my time is up, but can Secretary Austin just ask if we have the necessary authorities? Quickly.
I think we do, Senator, and this is something that we need to continue to review as we go forward. We certainly have the right to self-defense. We have authorities under the 2001 AUMF, and that enables us to do what we need to do in our counter-ISIS efforts. But again, as we go forward, it's always good to look at the authorities and make sure that we evolve them if that's required. And so you have my commitment to work with leadership and with you to continue to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. The committee will stand in recess until 12:55 hours and will reconvene in closed session in SVC 217. Thank you, gentlemen.
The second vote just started.
Yeah. Oh, great.